In the suffocating density of the primitive forest, I'm consumed by a visceral and inescapable fear. The sound of sharp claws and deadly teeth echoes around me. Paralyzed by terror, I face the materialization of a nightmare that few survive to tell. Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we begin today's attack report, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel. Your subscription is very important to us, so please subscribe. Also, write now in the comments which city you're watching from. We'd love to know. All of this because the crisp Montana air filled my lungs as I set out on what I thought would be a relaxing day hike. It was a beautiful September morning, the kind that makes you grateful to be alive and surrounded by nature's splendor. I, Hannah Evans, had been looking forward to this solo trek for weeks. As a software developer from Missoula, my days were usually spent hunched over a computer screen, so these occasional escapes into the wilderness were my lifeline. I adjusted my backpack, feeling the comfortable weight of my water bottle, trail mix, and first aid kit. The Bitterroot National Forest stretched out before me, a vast expanse of pine and fir trees that seemed to touch the cloudless sky. The trail I had chosen was moderately challenging, promising breathtaking views of the surrounding mountains. "You've got this, Hannah," I muttered to myself, taking my first steps onto the well-worn path. The sound of my boots crunching on fallen leaves and twigs was oddly satisfying, a rhythmic accompaniment to the chorus of birdsong overhead. As I hiked deeper into the forest, the sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating a dappled pattern on the forest floor. It was peaceful, almost eerily so. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the dense forest around the trail. I tried to brush it off as paranoia, a city dweller's irrational fear of the great outdoors. "It's just your imagination," I said aloud, hoping the sound of my voice would dispel the growing unease. "Probably just a deer or something." I paused to take a sip of water and check my map. According to my calculations, I was making good time. In another hour or so, I'd reach the summit and be rewarded with a panoramic view of the valley below. The thought spurred me on, and I picked up my pace. As I rounded a bend in the trail, a flash of movement caught my eye. I froze, my heart rate quickening. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting it. If it was a bear or mountain lion, I'd just announced my presence to a potential predator. Silence answered me, broken only by the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. "Get it together, Hannah. You're letting your imagination run wild." I continued on. But now every shadow seemed menacing, every rustle of leaves a potential threat. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see something, or someone, following me. A twig snapped behind me, causing my heart to race, but I convinced myself it was just a small animal. Still, I quickened my pace, no longer enjoying the hike but eager to reach the summit and start my descent back to civilization. The trail began to steepen, and I welcomed the physical exertion as a distraction from my growing unease. Sweat beaded on my forehead and my breathing became labored. I focused on putting one foot in front of the other, counting my steps to keep my mind occupied. As I neared the top of a particularly steep incline, I paused to catch my breath. That's when I noticed the silence. The birds had stopped singing, and even the wind seemed to have died down. An unnatural stillness hung in the air, making my skin crawl. I reached a clearing and froze, sensing something was terribly wrong. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and a chill ran down my spine despite the warmth of the day. "Hello?" I called out again, my voice sounding small and frightened in the oppressive silence. "Is anyone there?" The clearing should have been beautiful, a small meadow dotted with wildflowers surrounded by towering pines. But in that moment it felt like a trap, leaving me exposed and vulnerable. I fumbled for my phone, suddenly desperate to hear another human voice. But as I pulled it out of my pocket, my heart sank. No signal. Of course. I was miles from the nearest cell tower. A low, guttural sound emanated from the tree line to my left. It wasn't quite a growl, not quite a grunt, unlike anything I'd ever heard before. My body tensed, fight-or-flight instinct kicking in. "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. "This isn't funny." Another sound, closer this time. A heavy footfall, the crack of a branch under significant weight. Whatever it was big, too big to be human. I backed away slowly, my eyes darting from tree to tree, trying to spot the source of the sounds. My mind raced through possibilities: bear, mountain lion, wolf, but none seemed to fit. This was something else entirely. The sunlight filtering through the leaves created eerie shadows that seemed to dance and reach for me. Every shifting patch of darkness could be hiding the creature I could hear but couldn't see. My back hit something solid, a tree trunk. I'd reached the edge of the clearing. Part of me wanted to turn and run blindly into the forest, but I knew that was a sure way to get lost. Or worse, to provoke whatever was out there into chasing me. "Stay calm," I whispered to myself, though my racing heart betrayed my fear. "Just slowly make your way back to the trail. You can do this." I began to edge along the tree line, keeping my eyes on the spot where I'd heard the sounds. The silence was deafening, broken only by my own ragged breathing and the pounding of blood in my ears. Suddenly, a massive shape burst from the underbrush with shocking speed. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It was too big to be real, too fast for its size and covered in thick, matted fur. A scream caught in my throat as I realized with horrifying clarity what I was looking at. It was impossible. It couldn't be real. But there was no denying the creature that now stood at the edge of the clearing, its dark eyes fixed on me with predatory intent. Bigfoot, the legend come to life, and nothing like the gentle giant of campfire stories. This was a monster pure and simple, radiating malevolence and hunger. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, we stared at each other, prey and predator, locked in a frozen tableau of terror and anticipation. Then, with a roar that shook me to my very core, the creature charged. The spell broken, I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush with no thought but escape. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me, but pure adrenaline kept me moving. Behind me, I could hear the monster's heavy footsteps and angry grunts as it pursued me. It was toying with me, I realized, with sickening dread. If it wanted to, it could have caught me in seconds. As I ran, one thought echoed in my mind, a mantra of disbelief and terror. The last thing I expected was to be ambushed by Bigfoot in the middle of the day. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would change my life forever. My lungs burned as I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face and tearing at my clothes. The forest that had seemed so peaceful just moments ago now felt like a green hell, closing in around me as I fled from the impossible creature pursuing me. My blood ran cold as an inhuman roar shattered the forest's silence, and I realized with horrifying clarity that I wasn't alone. The sound was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. Not quite animal, not quite human, but filled with a primal rage that sent shivers down my spine. I risked a glance over my shoulder, and immediately regretted it. Through the gaps in the trees, I caught a glimpse of matted fur and glowing eyes. The creature was massive, easily 7 or 8 feet tall, its body covered in thick, dark hair. Its face was a nightmarish blend of ape and man, with a pronounced brow and a mouth full of yellowed teeth bared in a snarl. "This can't be real," I gasped, my voice barely above a whisper. "This can't be happening." But it was happening. Bigfoot, the legend, the myth, was real, and it was hunting me. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the burning in my muscles and the stitch in my side. I had to find help, had to reach civilization. But I was miles from the nearest town, and my phone was useless out here in the wilderness. Suddenly, my foot caught on a protruding root and I went sprawling. I hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. For a moment, I lay there, dazed and gasping for air. That moment of hesitation cost me dearly. A massive force slammed into my back, pinning me to the forest floor. The stench of wet fur and rotten meat filled my nostrils as I struggled to breathe under the monster's weight. Razor-sharp claws tore into my flesh, as I fought against the impossibly strong creature. "Help!" I screamed, though I knew no one could hear me. "Somebody, please help me!" The creature's hot breath washed over me as it leaned in close. I could feel its chest rumbling with a low, menacing growl. This close, the smell was overwhelming, a mixture of decay, musk, and something alien that I couldn't identify. I managed to turn my head just enough to look up at my attacker. I screamed in terror as I stared into the face of what could only be described as Bigfoot, its teeth bared in a vicious snarl. Its eyes were dark and intelligent, filled with a malevolence that chilled me to my core. "Please," I whimpered, though I knew it was futile. This wasn't a misunderstood gentle giant from folklore. This was a predator, and I was its prey. The creature's claws dug deeper into my back, and I felt warm blood soaking through my shirt. The pain was excruciating, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I tried to crawl away, my fingers digging into the soft earth, but the monster's weight kept me pinned. In that moment, I was certain I was going to die. Images flashed through my mind, my parents, my friends, the life I'd never get to live. I thought of all the people who would never know what happened to me, who would search these woods in vain for any trace of Hannah Evans. But some primal instinct for survival kicked in, overriding my fear and pain. With strength born of desperation, I managed to twist my body, bringing my knee up hard into the creature's midsection. To my surprise, it worked. The beast let out a grunt of pain or surprise, I couldn't tell which, and its grip loosened just enough for me to squirm free. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline masking the pain of my injuries. I didn't dare look back as I started running again, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The forest seemed to blur around me as I ran, branches and leaves whipping past in a green haze. I could hear the creature crashing through the underbrush behind me, its heavy footfalls getting closer with each passing second. "No, no, no," I panted, pushing myself beyond my limits. My legs felt like jelly, threatening to give out at any moment, but fear kept me moving. Suddenly, the trees thinned out, and I burst into another small clearing. For a split second, hope flared in my chest. If I could just make it across this open space, maybe I could lose the creature in the denser forest on the other side. But as I reached the center of the clearing, I realized my mistake. I was exposed, vulnerable, and the monster was right behind me. I heard a roar of triumph as the creature burst from the tree line. I tried to put on an extra burst of speed, but my body had nothing left to give. My foot caught on something, a rock, a root, I couldn't tell, and I went down hard. I rolled onto my back, facing my pursuer as it bore down on me. Time seemed to slow as I took in every terrifying detail. The ripple of muscles under matted fur, the glint of sunlight on razor-sharp claws, the look of savage hunger in its dark eyes. "No," I screamed, throwing my arms up in a futile attempt to protect myself. The impact never came. Instead, I heard a sharp crack like a gunshot, echoing through the clearing. The creature stumbled, letting out a roar of pain or anger. I blinked, trying to process what was happening. Had someone found us? Was I saved? But when I looked up, I saw no rescuer. Instead, I saw the creature backing away, its eyes darting around the clearing. It looked afraid. Another crack rang out, and this time I saw a branch fall from a nearby tree, splintered by some unseen force. The monster roared again, but this time it was a sound of frustration and retreat. Before I could fully comprehend what was happening, the creature turned and loped back into the forest, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as it had appeared. I lay there on the forest floor, my body trembling uncontrollably, unable to believe what had just happened. The clearing was silent now, save for the pounding of my heart and my ragged breathing. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself to a sitting position. My clothes were torn and bloodied, and every movement sent waves of pain through my body. But I was alive. Somehow, impossibly, I had survived. As the adrenaline began to fade, the full weight of what had just occurred hit me. I had been attacked by Bigfoot, The creature of legend was real and it had nearly killed me. I knew I needed to move to find help, but for a moment I couldn't bring myself to stand. Tears streamed down my face as I sat there, shaking and sobbing. "Get up, Hannah," I finally whispered to myself. "You have to get up, you have to get out of here." With trembling hands, I reached for a nearby tree trunk, using it to pull myself to my feet. My legs felt weak, threatening to give out at any moment, but I forced myself to take one step, then another. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away from this place. Away from the monster that had nearly ended my life. Away from the impossible nightmare that had become my reality. As I stumbled through the forest, one thought kept repeating in my mind. Would anyone believe me? The scratches and bruises would heal. But how could I ever explain what had really happened out here in the Montana wilderness? Little did I know my ordeal was far from over. The physical escape was just the beginning. The real challenge would be convincing others, and sometimes even myself, that what I had experienced was real. With each painful step, I moved further from the site of my terrifying encounter, but the memory of those savage eyes and cruel claws would haunt me for a long time to come. With strength born of desperation, I managed to break free and stumble away from the nightmarish beast. My entire body screamed in pain, but the primal fear coursing through my veins propelled me forward. I couldn't believe I was still alive, let alone moving, but I knew that if I stopped now, it would be the end of me. The forest, once a place of serenity, had transformed into a green maze of terror. Every shadow concealed potential danger. Every rustle of leaves sent my heart racing. I could hear the creature's heavy footsteps and angry grunts as it pursued me through the underbrush. The sound was getting closer, and I knew I couldn't outrun it for long. "Please, God," I gasped between ragged breaths, "help me survive this." I zigzagged between trees, hoping to throw off my pursuer. Branches whipped at my face and tore at my clothes as I ran blindly, fueled by pure adrenaline. The sting of fresh cuts mingled with the throbbing pain from the earlier attack, but I couldn't afford to slow down. Suddenly, my foot caught on an exposed root, and I went sprawling. I hit the ground hard, the impact knocking what little air I had left out of my lungs. For a terrifying moment, I lay there, dazed and gasping. "Get up, Hannah," I screamed at myself internally. "Get up or you're dead." I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the sharp pain in my ankle. As I stood, I caught a glimpse of movement through the trees. The creature was there, its massive form unmistakable even in the dappled forest light. Its eyes locked onto mine, and I saw a flash of teeth as it let out a bone-chilling roar. Terror gave me a fresh burst of energy, and I took off again, no longer caring about direction or stealth. My only thought was to put as much distance between myself and that monster as possible. "Help!" I screamed as I ran, though I knew it was futile. "Somebody help me!" My lungs burned and my legs ached, but the sound of the monster crashing through the forest kept me moving. It was toying with me, I realized with sickening dread. If it wanted to, it could have caught me already. This was a game to it, a hunt, and I was nothing more than prey. As I ran, the trees began to thin out. Hope flared in my chest as I realized I was nearing the edge of the forest. If I could just make it to open ground, maybe I'd have a chance. I burst out onto a dirt road, my relief short-lived as I heard the creature's roar echoing behind me. The sound was closer now, too close. I looked frantically up and down the road, praying for a car, a person, anything that could help me. The road stretched empty in both directions. "No, no, no," I panted, panic rising in my throat. I couldn't stop now, couldn't give up. I chose a direction at random and started running again, my feet pounding on the hard-packed dirt. Behind me, I heard the creature emerge from the tree line. Its roar of triumph sent shivers down my spine. This was it, I thought. This is where I die. But just as I was about to give up hope, I heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the rumble of an engine. A pickup truck appeared around a bend in the road, heading in my direction. "Hey," I screamed, waving my arms frantically. "Help, please stop." The truck slowed as it approached, the driver's confused face visible through the windshield. I risked a glance behind me and saw the creature hesitate at the edge of the forest, seemingly wary of the approaching vehicle. The truck came to a stop beside me, and an older man with a weathered face and a gray beard leaned out the window. "Miss, are you all right?" he asked, his eyes widening as he took in my battered appearance. "Please," I gasped. "You have to help me. It's after me. We need to go now." The man's brow furrowed in concern. "What's after you? Are you hurt?" "There's no time," I cried, glancing nervously at the tree line. "Please just let me in. We have to leave." Something in my voice or expression must have conveyed the urgency of the situation, because the man nodded and reached across to open the passenger door. "Get in," he said. I didn't need to be told twice. I scrambled into the truck, slamming the door behind me. "Go!" I yelled. "Drive!" The man put the truck in gear and accelerated, sending up a cloud of dust behind us. As we sped away, I twisted in my seat to look out the rear window. For a moment, I thought I saw a large, dark shape move at the edge of the forest. Then it was gone, obscured by the dust and the growing distance. We drove in silence for several minutes, the only sound my ragged breathing as I tried to calm myself. Finally, the man spoke. "Name's Frank," he said, glancing at me with concern. "Want to tell me what that was all about?" I opened my mouth to explain, then closed it again. How could I possibly describe what had just happened? Who would believe me? I was attacked, I finally managed. In the forest. I thought it was going to kill me. Frank's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Attacked? By what? A bear? I shook my head, tears welling up in my eyes. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." "Try me," Frank said gently. "I've lived in these parts for 60 years, seen a lot of strange things in my time." I took a deep breath, wincing at the pain in my ribs. It was Bigfoot," I whispered, half expecting him to laugh or tell me I was crazy. But Frank just nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the road. "Figured it might be something like that," he said quietly. I stared at him in disbelief. You believe me?" He shrugged. "Like I said, I've seen some strange things, and you're not the first person to come running out of those woods with a wild story." He glanced at me again. "Though you're in worse shape than most. We need to get you to a hospital." I nodded, suddenly aware of how much pain I was in now that the adrenaline was wearing off. "Thank you," I said, my voice breaking. "Thank you for stopping, for believing me." Frank reached over and patted my hand gently. "You're safe now," he said. "Whatever was out there, it can't get you here." As we drove towards town and the promise of safety and medical attention, I couldn't shake the feeling that this ordeal was far from over. The creature was still out there, and I had a sinking feeling that my encounter with it would haunt me for a long time to come. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, watching the forest recede behind us. For now, at least, I had escaped. But the memory of those terrifying moments in the woods, of the impossible creature that had nearly ended my life, would stay with me forever. Little did I know, the challenge of convincing others of what I had experienced would prove almost as daunting as the escape itself. My body trembled uncontrollably as I stumbled into the nearest town, covered in blood and barely able to speak. Frank, the kind-hearted stranger who had rescued me from the forest, supported me as we made our way to the local clinic. The small Montana town of Pinewood seemed surreal after my terrifying ordeal. People going about their day, completely unaware of the nightmare that lurked in the nearby woods. "Easy now," Frank murmured as we approached the clinic's entrance. "We're almost there." The automatic doors slid open, and the sterile smell of disinfectant hit me like a wall. A nurse behind the reception desk looked up, her eyes widening as she took in my battered appearance. "Oh my God," she gasped, rushing around the desk. "What happened?" I opened my mouth to explain, but the words caught in my throat. How could I possibly describe what I'd been through? The nurse didn't wait for an answer, instead calling out, Dr. Reeves, we need you out here now. Everything became a blur of activity. I was ushered into an examination room, my torn and bloodied clothes carefully removed as the doctor and nurses assessed my injuries. Their voices seemed to come from far away as they discussed lacerations, contusions, and possible fractures. Miss, can you hear me? Dr. Reeves, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, was speaking to me. I nodded, trying to focus on his face. Can you tell us what happened to you? I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. I was attacked, I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. The doctor nodded encouragingly. Okay, that's good. Can you tell us what attacked you? Was it a bear? A mountain lion? I shook my head, tears welling up in my eyes. You won't believe me, I whispered. Dr. Reeves placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. Try us. We're here to help you, no matter what happened. Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself for their reactions. It was Bigfoot, I said, my voice shaking. I know it sounds crazy, but I swear it's true. It chased me through the forest. It tried to kill me. The room fell silent. I could see the doubt creeping into their eyes, the slight furrow in Dr. Reeves's brow. The nurse exchanged a glance with him, and I knew what they were thinking. Hannah, Dr. Reeves said carefully, using the name I'd given them earlier, you've been through a traumatic experience. Sometimes in moments of extreme stress, our minds can play tricks on us. No, I interrupted, more forcefully than I intended. I know what I saw. It was real. I trailed off, the memory of those savage eyes and razor-sharp claws flooding back. My body began to shake uncontrollably. It's okay, the nurse soothed, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders. You're safe now. Dr. Reeves made a note on his clipboard. We're going to take care of your injuries, Hannah. And then I think it might be good for you to talk to someone about what you've been through. We have an excellent trauma counselor on staff. I don't need a counselor, I insisted, frustration building inside me. I need someone to believe me, to do something about that thing out there in the forest. The disbelief in the eyes of the local sheriff made me question my own sanity as I recounted my horrifying encounter. He had arrived at the clinic shortly after I was admitted, alerted by the staff about a possible animal attack victim. So, let me get this straight, Sheriff Dawson said, his weathered face a mask of skepticism. You're saying a Bigfoot attacked you? Not a bear, not a mountain lion, but an actual Bigfoot? I nodded, fighting back tears of frustration. I know how it sounds, but I swear it's the truth. It was huge, covered in dark fur. It chased me through the forest, tried to tear me apart with its claws. The sheriff exchanged a look with Dr. Reeves, who shrugged slightly. Miss Evans, Sheriff Dawson said, his tone gentle but firm. I understand you've been through a traumatic experience, but Bigfoot, well, that's just not possible. We don't have any credible reports of such creatures in this area, or anywhere else for that matter. But my injuries, I protested, gesturing to the bandages covering my arms and torso. How do you explain these? Dr. Reeves stepped in. The lacerations are consistent with an animal attack, possibly a bear. In the heat of the moment, with the adrenaline pumping, it's understandable that your mind might have interpreted things differently. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They thought I was crazy or lying or both. Frank, I said suddenly, remembering my rescuer. Frank believed me. He picked me up on the road. He'll tell you. Sheriff Dawson nodded. We've spoken to Mr. Holloway. He confirmed picking you up, but he didn't see any creature. He said you were in shock, babbling about being chased. My heart sank. Even Frank, who had seemed so understanding in the truck, hadn't fully believed me. Or maybe he'd changed his story to avoid sounding crazy himself. Look, Sheriff Dawson continued, his voice softening. We'll send a team out to search the area where you were hiking. If there's any dangerous wildlife out there, we'll find it. In the meantime, you should rest and recover. Dr. Reeves says you can be released tomorrow if there are no complications. I nodded numbly, too exhausted to argue anymore. As the sheriff left, Dr. Reeves approached my bedside. Hannah, I'm going to prescribe you something to help you sleep. You've been through a lot, and rest is the best thing for you right now." As the doctor prepared the injection, I stared out the window at the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, beyond the town lights, the creature was still roaming free, and no one believed me. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw the creature's savage face, its hot breath on my skin, and I knew sleep would never come easily again. The nurse administered the sedative, and I felt a cool rush in my veins. As consciousness began to slip away, one thought echoed in my mind. I was alone in this. No one believed my story, and I had no way to prove what had happened. The monster that had nearly killed me was still out there, and I was the only one who knew the truth. I drifted off into a fitful sleep, haunted by nightmares of glowing eyes and reaching claws. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of my struggle. Not only to come to terms with what had happened to me, but to convince a world of skeptics that the impossible was, in fact, terrifyingly real. The morning light filtering through the hospital room window did little to dispel the nightmares that had plagued my fitful sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, my body aching from the attack, as I waited for Sheriff Dawson to arrive. Despite the skepticism I'd faced yesterday, I was determined to make them understand the gravity of what I'd encountered in those woods. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. Sheriff Dawson entered, followed by a man in a forest ranger uniform. "Morning, Miss Evans," the sheriff said, his tone carefully neutral. "How are you feeling today?" "Like I was mauled by a monster," I replied dryly. "Which I was." The sheriff sighed, exchanging a glance with the ranger. "This is Ranger Mike Thompson. He's going to accompany us to the site where you say the incident occurred." I nodded, a mix of dread and determination settling in my stomach. The forest that once seemed so peaceful now loomed ominously as I led the search party back to the site of the attack. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig made me flinch, expecting to see the creature lunging out at us. "It was right around here," I said, my voice shaking as we reached a small clearing. The memories came flooding back, vivid and terrifying. This is where it first appeared. Ranger Thompson knelt down, examining the ground. "There are some disturbances in the vegetation," he admitted, "but nothing conclusive. Could be deer, could be a bear." "It wasn't a bear," I insisted, frustration building. "I know what I saw. It was huge, bipedal, covered in dark fur." "Miss Evans," Sheriff Dawson interrupted gently, "I understand you believe what you're saying. But we need physical evidence, footprints, hair samples, something we can analyze." I looked around desperately, searching for anything that could prove my story. But the forest floor, dappled with morning sunlight, revealed nothing extraordinary. My heart sank as we found no trace of the creature, just some trampled vegetation that could have been caused by anything. "There has to be something," I muttered, more to myself than the others. It was right here. Its claws tore into me, its breath. I shuddered at the memory. Ranger Thompson approached, his expression sympathetic. "Look, I've been working these woods for 20 years. I've seen bear attacks, mountain lion encounters, but never anything like what you're describing. Are you sure you didn't just what?" I snapped, whirling to face him. "Imagine it? Hallucinate a giant murderous creature? Do these look imaginary to you?" I pulled up my sleeve, revealing the bandages covering the deep claw marks. The ranger held up his hands placatingly. "I'm not saying you weren't attacked, but in high-stress situations the mind can play tricks." "Stop," I interrupted, closing my eyes and taking a deep breath. "Just stop. I know what I saw. I know what happened to me, and that thing is still out there." Sheriff Dawson stepped between us. "All right, let's all take a moment to calm down. We'll continue the search, see if we can find any evidence to corroborate Miss Evans's story." For the next hour, we combed the area. I desperately searched for any evidence, a footprint, a tuft of fur, anything to prove that I wasn't losing my mind. But as the morning wore on, my hope dwindled. "I don't understand," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It was here. It was real. How can there be nothing left?" The pitying looks from the rangers cut deeper than my physical wounds as they dismissed my story as a bear attack or a vivid hallucination. I could see it in their eyes. They thought I was either lying or delusional. "Miss Evans," Sheriff Dawson said gently, "we've searched the area thoroughly. There's no sign of any unusual animal activity. I'm afraid without any concrete evidence." "You think I did this to myself?" I interrupted, gesturing to my injuries. "That I made it all up?" The sheriff sighed. "No one's saying that. But the facts are, we have no proof of this creature you described. The most likely explanation is that you encountered a bear or mountain lion, and the trauma of the attack affected your perception of events." I opened my mouth to argue further, but the words died in my throat. What was the point? They'd made up their minds. No matter what I said, they wouldn't believe me. As we prepared to leave the forest, I took one last look around. The setting sun cast long shadows through the trees, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. A chill ran down my spine as I imagined those savage eyes peering at us from the deepening gloom. "Can we go now?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Please, I don't want to be here anymore." Sheriff Dawson nodded, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Of course. We'll get you back to town. I think it might be a good idea for you to talk to someone about what you've been through. We have a great trauma counselor." "I don't need a counselor," I said flatly. "I need someone to believe me." The ride back to town was silent, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken doubts and frustrations. As we pulled up to the small hospital where I'd been treated, I turned to Sheriff Dawson. "What happens now?" I asked. He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "We'll file a report about a possible animal attack. We'll increase patrols in the area for a while just to be safe. But without any evidence of this, Bigfoot, there's not much more we can do." I nodded, too exhausted to argue further. As I got out of the car, the sheriff called after me. "Miss Evans, for what it's worth, I'm sorry about what happened to you out there. Whatever it was, I'm glad you survived." I managed a weak smile, but as I walked into the hospital, the weight of what had happened, and the knowledge that no one believed me, settled heavily on my shoulders. That night, as I lay in my hospital bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The creature was still out there, and I was the only one who knew the truth. As I drifted into an uneasy sleep, one thought echoed in my mind. How do you fight a monster that no one believes exists? Little did I know, the real battle was just beginning. Not against the creature in the woods, but against a world determined to explain away the inexplicable. The morning after the fruitless search in the forest, I was discharged from the hospital. My physical wounds were beginning to heal, but the emotional scars ran deep. As I stepped out into the bright Montana sunlight, I felt exposed and vulnerable, as if the creature might suddenly appear in broad daylight to finish what it had started. My phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. News of my animal attack had spread quickly in the small town of Pinewood, and it seemed everyone wanted a piece of the story. I ignored most of the messages, but one caught my eye, a local news reporter requesting an interview. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him at a small diner in town. Maybe, I thought, if I could tell my story publicly, someone would believe me. The diner was nearly empty when I arrived, save for a few curious locals who tried to hide their stares as I walked in. The reporter, a young man named Jake with an eager smile, waved me over to his booth. "Miss Evans," he said, standing to shake my hand. "I'm Jake from the Pinewood Gazette. Thank you for agreeing to speak with me." I nodded, sliding into the booth across from him. "I just want people to know the truth," I said quietly. Jake's smile faltered slightly at my tone, but he quickly recovered, pulling out a notebook. "Of course. Why don't you start by telling me what happened in your own words?" Taking a deep breath, I recounted my horrifying experience in the forest. As I spoke, I could see the skepticism growing in Jake's eyes. his initial excitement fading to barely concealed disbelief. "So," he said slowly when I finished, "you're saying it wasn't a bear or mountain lion, but Bigfoot?" I nodded, bracing myself for his reaction. The local news reporter's condescending tone made my blood boil as he asked, "Are you sure you didn't just imagine the whole thing? Trauma can do strange things to a person's memory." "I know what I saw," I insisted, my voice rising. "It was real. It was right there in front of me, trying to kill me. Why would I make this up?" Jake held up his hands placatingly. "I'm not saying you're lying, Miss Evans. But you have to admit, it's a pretty incredible story, and with no evidence to back it up?" "No evidence?" I interrupted, pulling up my sleeve to reveal the bandages covering my arm. "What do you call these?" "Animal attack injuries," Jake replied gently, "which is consistent with a bear or mountain lion encounter. But Bigfoot? That's a pretty big leap." I slumped back in my seat, the fight draining out of me. "You don't believe me either," I said flatly. Jake's expression softened. "Look, I'm just trying to report the facts, and right now, the facts don't support the existence of Bigfoot, but I promise I'll present your story fairly in the article." I nodded numbly, suddenly eager to end this conversation. "Are we done here?" As I left the diner, I could feel the eyes of the other patrons on me. Their whispers followed me out the door, and I knew that by nightfall the whole town would be talking about that crazy girl who thinks she saw Bigfoot. Back in my small apartment, I collapsed onto the couch, emotionally drained. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother calling. I hesitated before answering. "Hannah? Sweetie, are you okay? We just heard about what happened." My mom's worried voice came through the speaker. "I'm fine, Mom," I lied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just a little shaken up." "Oh, honey, your father and I can be there tomorrow if you need us. A bear attack. It must have been terrifying." I closed my eyes, fighting back tears. Even my own parents didn't know the truth. It wasn't a bear, Mom," I said quietly. "What do you mean? The news said—" "I know what the news said," I interrupted. "But it's not true. It was something else. Something impossible." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When my mother spoke again, her voice was careful, measured. "Hannah, sweetie, you've been through a traumatic experience. It's normal to be confused about what happened." "I'm not confused," I snapped, immediately regretting my tone. "I'm sorry, I know what I saw, Mom, and it wasn't a bear." My own family's forced smiles and careful words told me they thought I was having some kind of breakdown. I could hear it in my mother's voice as she suggested I talk to a therapist, in my father's awkward attempts to change the subject when I tried to explain what really happened. After ending the call, I sat in silence, the weight of disbelief crushing down on me. I scrolled through online comments on the local news website's article about my bear attack. Each word felt like a fresh wound. Attention seeker. Probably drunk or high in the woods. Another Bigfoot hoax. When will people grow up? I threw my phone across the room in frustration, then immediately regretted it as pain shot through my injured arm. Wincing, I walked to the bathroom to change my bandages. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. The scratches and bruises, the only proof I had that the nightmare was real. Dark circles under my eyes testified to nights of fitful sleep plagued by terrifying dreams. In that moment, looking at my battered reflection, a small part of me wondered if everyone else was right. Could I have imagined it all? No, I thought firmly. I know what I saw, what I felt. It was real. As night fell, I found myself jumping at every little noise. The sound of rustling leaves outside my window sent me into a panic, convinced that the creature had come back for me. Logically, I knew it was impossible. I was miles from the forest, safe in my apartment. But logic had little power over the primal fear that now lived in my bones. I huddled on my bed, every muscle tense, straining to hear any sound that might indicate danger. The normal noises of the night, A car passing by, a dog barking in the distance, took on sinister overtones in my hypervigilant state. As the hours ticked by, exhaustion began to overtake fear. But even as my eyes grew heavy, I fought against sleep. I knew what waited for me in my dreams: glowing eyes, razor-sharp claws, and the certainty that no one would believe me when I cried for help. In those dark hours before dawn, a realization settled over me like a heavy blanket. This was my new reality. A world where I alone knew the truth of what lurked in the forests of Montana, where every shadow held the potential for terror, and where my own experiences were dismissed as delusion or lies. As the first light of morning began to creep through my window, I made a decision. If no one would believe me, I would have to find proof. Somehow, some way, I would show the world that I wasn't crazy, that the monster in the woods was real. Little did I know this determination would lead me down a path even more dangerous than my encounter in the forest. The search for truth would consume me, testing not just my courage, but my very grip on reality. As the sun rose on my second day back home, I found myself unable to shake the gnawing feeling that I needed to do something, anything, to prove that my encounter was real. Sleep had eluded me for most of the night, and in the dim light of dawn, I made a decision that would change the course of my life. I booted up my laptop, wincing as the movement pulled at my healing wounds. The internet was both a blessing and a curse, a vast repository of information, but also a breeding ground for misinformation and ridicule. I hesitated for a moment before typing "Bigfoot sightings Montana" into the search bar. What followed was a deep dive into a world I had never known existed. Blurry photos, shaky video footage, eyewitness accounts. Some seemed credible, others were clearly hoaxes, but each one resonated with me in a way I couldn't explain. These people, whoever they were, had seen something they couldn't explain, just like me. I pored over blurry photos and eyewitness accounts of Bigfoot sightings, desperate to find someone who would believe me. Hours slipped by unnoticed as I scoured forums, watched documentaries, and read scientific debates about the possibility of undiscovered primate species. There has to be something here, I muttered to myself, rubbing my tired eyes. Some piece of evidence that can't be dismissed. As the day wore on, my small apartment transformed. The walls of my room disappeared behind a web of string and pinned articles as I tried to make sense of what had happened to me. Maps of reported sightings, printouts of footprint casts, and my own hastily scribbled notes covered every available surface. A knock at my door startled me out of my research-induced trance. I jumped, my heart racing, before reminding myself that Bigfoot wasn't going to politely knock on my apartment door. "Hannah? It's me, Sarah. Can I come in?" I hesitated. Sarah was my best friend, but I hadn't spoken to her since the attack. How could I explain what I was doing? "Just a second," I called out, frantically trying to tidy up the chaos of my living room. It was a futile effort. When I opened the door, Sarah's eyes widened as she took in my appearance and the state of my apartment. "Oh my God, Hannah," she gasped. "What happened to you? I've been trying to reach you for days." I stepped aside to let her in, suddenly self-conscious about the mess and my own disheveled state. "I'm sorry. I've been busy." Sarah walked into the living room, her gaze sweeping over the walls covered in Bigfoot-related material. "Hannah," she said slowly, "what is all this?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation I knew was coming. "Sarah, I need to tell you something about what really happened to me in the forest." Over the next hour, I poured out my story to Sarah. I told her everything: the terrifying encounter, the disbelief of the authorities, the growing certainty that I needed to find proof. To her credit, she listened without interrupting, her expression a mix of concern and confusion. When I finished, Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "Hannah," she finally said, her voice gentle, "I'm worried about you. This obsession, it's not healthy." "It's not an obsession," I insisted. "It's the truth. I know what I saw, Sarah. Why doesn't anyone believe me? Sarah reached out, placing a hand on my arm. I believe that you believe it, Hannah. But you have to admit it sounds crazy. Bigfoot? In Montana? I pulled away, frustration bubbling up inside me. Not you too. I thought you of all people would understand. I'm trying to understand, Sarah said, her voice rising slightly. But look at yourself, Hannah. Look at this place. You're obsessing over something that can't possibly be real. You need help. I don't need help, I shouted, immediately regretting my outburst as Sarah flinched. I'm sorry, I need someone to believe me, to help me prove that I'm not crazy. Sarah's expression softened. Oh, Hannah, I don't think you're crazy. I think you've been through something traumatic and your mind is trying to make sense of it. But this, she gestured to the walls covered in Bigfoot information. This isn't the way to do it. I slumped onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. What am I supposed to do, Sarah? Just pretend it never happened? Go back to my normal life knowing that thing is out there? Sarah sat next to me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. I think maybe you should talk to someone. A professional. They might be able to help you process what happened. I shook my head, but didn't argue further. I knew Sarah was trying to help, but she couldn't understand. No one could. After Sarah left, promising to check on me again soon, I found myself drawn back to my research. I jumped at every unexplained sound, my nerves frayed to the breaking point as I waited for something. A revelation, a piece of evidence I had missed, anything that could validate my experience. As night fell, exhaustion began to take its toll. Sleep became my enemy, filled with vivid nightmares of massive hands reaching for me from the darkness. I jolted awake several times, heart pounding, convinced that the creature was in my room. In the early hours of the morning, as I stared at my laptop screen with bleary eyes, a thought occurred to me. I found myself drawn back to the forest's edge, both terrified and oddly compelled to seek out the creature that had attacked me. No, I said aloud, shaking my head to clear the thought. I can't go back there. I won't. But even as I said the words, a part of me knew it wasn't true. The forest called to me now, a siren song of danger and potential discovery. If no one would believe me, perhaps I needed to find the proof myself. As the sun began to rise on a new day, I made a decision that I knew was foolish, perhaps even suicidal. But I couldn't see any other way forward. I would return to the forest, one last time. Not to confront the creature, I wasn't that crazy, but to search for any evidence I might have missed. Little did I know, this decision would lead to an encounter that would challenge everything I thought I knew about my experience and about myself. The truth, I would soon discover, was more terrifying than I could have imagined. The decision to return to the forest weighed heavily on me as I drove my beat-up Honda along the winding mountain road. Every fiber of my being screamed that this was a terrible idea, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to do this. For my sanity, for validation, for closure. As I parked at the trailhead, the early morning mist clung to the trees, creating an eerie, otherworldly atmosphere. I checked my backpack one last time. Camera, extra batteries, plaster for casting footprints, and a can of bear spray, just in case. My hands shook slightly as I zipped it up. You can do this, Hannah, I muttered to myself, taking a deep breath. Just get in, look for evidence, and get out. Quick and easy. But as I stepped onto the trail, memories of my previous encounter flooded back. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. Every rustle of leaves sent my heart racing. I gripped the bear spray tightly, my knuckles white with tension. The forest was quiet, too quiet. No birdsong, no chattering squirrels. It was as if the entire ecosystem was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I tried to focus on my mission, scanning the ground for any signs of unusual tracks or disturbances. After about an hour of fruitless searching, I reached a small clearing. My heart nearly stopped as I caught a glimpse of a large, hairy figure moving through the trees in the distance. Time seemed to stand still as I processed what I was seeing. No, I whispered, my voice barely audible. It can't be. But there was no denying it. The creature, Bigfoot, was real, and it was here, mere yards away from me. My body screamed at me to run, but I was rooted to the spot, unable to look away from the impossible sight before me. I fumbled for my camera with shaking hands, knowing this might be my only chance to prove I wasn't crazy. The creature hadn't noticed me yet, moving with surprising grace for its size through the underbrush. Come on, I muttered, trying to steady my hands enough to get a clear shot. The camera felt impossibly heavy, my injured arm protesting the strain. Just as I was about to press the shutter, the creature's head snapped in my direction. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I knew I had made a terrible mistake. The creature's roar sent birds scattering from the treetops as it charged towards me with frightening speed. The sound was just as I remembered, a primal, bone-chilling bellow that seemed to shake the very air around me. "Oh God! Oh God!" I gasped, stumbling backward. My finger desperately pressed the camera's shutter button as the monster bore down on me. I prayed that at least one of the shots would be clear enough to serve as proof. But there was no time to check. The creature was closing the distance between us with terrifying rapidity. I turned and ran, my legs pumping furiously as I crashed through the underbrush. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me at every step, but pure adrenaline kept me moving. I could hear the monster's heavy footfalls behind me, getting closer with each passing second. "Help!" I screamed, though I knew it was futile. There was no one out here to hear me, no one to come to my rescue. "Somebody please!" I risked a glance over my shoulder, and immediately wished I hadn't. The creature was right behind me, its massive form filling my vision. I could see every detail of its face, the heavy brow, the wild eyes filled with what looked like rage, the mouth open in a roar that showed yellowed, pointed teeth. In that moment of distraction, my foot caught on a root. I went down hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. The camera flew from my grasp, landing somewhere in the underbrush. "No!" I cried, desperately reaching for it. But there was no time. I rolled onto my back just as the creature reached me. Its massive form loomed over me, blocking out the sky. This was it, I thought. This is how I die. But as the creature raised its arm, something unexpected happened. A loud crack echoed through the forest, like a gunshot. The monster flinched, its head whipping around to look for the source of the noise. Another crack, and a branch near us splintered. The creature roared in what sounded like frustration or fear. To my utter astonishment, it turned and loped away, disappearing into the forest as quickly as it had appeared. I lay there on the forest floor, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. What had just happened? Who or what had scared the creature away? As the adrenaline began to fade, pain set in. My body ached from the fall, and I could feel warm blood trickling from fresh cuts on my arms and face. But I was alive. Somehow, impossibly, I had survived a second encounter with Bigfoot. With trembling hands, I pushed myself to a sitting position. The forest was silent again, save for the pounding of my heart and my ragged breathing. I looked around frantically for my camera, but it was nowhere to be seen. No, I muttered, crawling on my hands and knees, searching the underbrush. It has to be here, the photos. They're my only proof. But as the minutes ticked by and my search grew more desperate, a sinking feeling settled in my stomach. The camera was gone. Whether it had been destroyed in my fall, or somehow taken by the creature, I couldn't say. But my evidence, my chance to prove my sanity to the world, had vanished. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I realized I must have hit my head in the fall. The world spun around me, and darkness crept in at the edges of my vision. "Have to get help," I mumbled, trying to stand. But my legs wouldn't cooperate. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was the rustling of leaves and the vague impression of a figure moving towards me through the trees. When I awoke, I was no longer in the forest. The sterile smell of disinfectant and the beeping of machines told me I was back in the hospital. How I had gotten there, I had no idea. As my eyes fluttered open, I saw a nurse checking my vitals. She smiled when she noticed I was awake. "Welcome back, Miss Evans," she said gently. "You gave us quite a scare." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and raw. The nurse helped me sip some water before continuing. "A hiker found you unconscious in the woods and called for help. You're lucky he came along when he did." My mind raced, trying to piece together what had happened. The creature, the chase, the mysterious sounds that had saved me. It all felt like a dream, but the pain in my body told me it had been all too real. "My camera?" I croaked. "Did they find my camera?" The nurse's brow furrowed in confusion. "I'm sorry. There was no camera with you when you were brought in. Just your backpack and some hiking gear." My heart sank. Without the photos, I had no proof. No one would believe me. Once again, I was left with nothing but my own testimony, a story so incredible that even I was beginning to doubt my own sanity. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I realized that my ordeal was far from over. The creature was still out there, and I was the only one who knew the truth. But how could I convince anyone when I had no evidence to back up my claims? Little did I know the events of that day in the forest would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge not just my credibility, but my very understanding of reality itself. I awoke in a hospital bed, my head throbbing, and my camera nowhere to be found. The sterile white walls and the rhythmic beeping of machines were becoming all too familiar. As I tried to piece together the events that led me here, a doctor entered the room, his face a mask of professional concern. "Miss Evans," he said, consulting the chart at the foot of my bed. "I'm Dr. Larson. How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck," I groaned, wincing as I tried to sit up. "What happened? How did I get here?" Dr. Larson pulled up a chair beside my bed. "A hiker found you unconscious in the forest and called for help. You've got a mild concussion, some cuts and bruises, and we had to restitch some of your previous wounds. Can you tell me what you remember?" I hesitated, the memory of my encounter with the creature vivid in my mind. But the pitying looks from the doctors and police officers told me that once again, no one believed my story. I could see it in Dr. Larson's eyes, the same skepticism I'd faced before. I went back to the forest," I began cautiously. "I was looking for evidence of what attacked me before." Dr. Larson's brow furrowed. "Evidence of the bear attack? Miss Evans, that was a very risky decision given your recent trauma." "It wasn't a bear," I insisted, my voice rising. "I saw it again. The creature. Bigfoot. It chased me. I fell, and then something scared it away. I had photos, but my camera's gone." The doctor's expression shifted from concern to something that looked uncomfortably like pity. "Hannah," he said gently, using my first name, "I understand you've been through a traumatic experience. It's not uncommon for the mind to create explanations or vivid memories to cope with extreme stress." I shook my head vehemently, ignoring the pain the movement caused. "No, you don't understand. It was real. I saw it, clear as day. Why won't anyone believe me?" Dr. Larson sighed, leaning back in his chair. "We did find some concerning things when you were brought in." He hesitated before continuing. "Your blood work showed elevated levels of certain compounds. Have you been taking any recreational substances recently?" The implication hit me like a slap in the face. "You think I was high? That I hallucinated the whole thing?" "I'm not accusing you of anything," Dr. Larson said quickly, "but the combination of substances in your system, coupled with the stress and previous trauma, could explain the vivid experiences you're describing." I stared at him in disbelief. "I wasn't on drugs. I don't do drugs. How can you even suggest that?" Before Dr. Larson could respond, there was a knock at the door. A police officer entered, his face stern. "Miss Evans, I'm Officer Collins. I'd like to ask you a few questions about what happened in the forest if you're feeling up to it." I nodded, a small spark of hope igniting in my chest. Maybe, just maybe, the police would take me seriously this time. But as Officer Collins began his questioning, it quickly became clear that he, like everyone else, had already made up his mind about what had happened. "So you returned to the site of your previous encounter," he said, his tone making it clear what he thought of my story. "Can you explain why you felt the need to do that?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. I needed proof. I knew no one believed me about what really happened, so I thought if I could find evidence. Officer Collins nodded, jotting something down in his notebook. "And did you find any evidence?" "I saw it again," I said, leaning forward earnestly. "The creature, Bigfoot, it chased me. I took photos, but my camera's gone now. You have to believe me." The officer exchanged a glance with Dr. Larson, and I could practically see them silently agreeing that I was either lying or delusional. "Miss Evans," Officer Collins said carefully, "we searched the area where you were found. There was no sign of any large animal activity, let alone Bigfoot. Are you sure you're not confused about what happened?" I slumped back against my pillows, frustration and despair washing over me. "I know what I saw," I said quietly. "Why would I make this up?" The questioning continued for another half hour, but it was clear that neither Officer Collins nor Dr. Larson believed a word of my story. By the time they left, I was emotionally exhausted and on the verge of tears. As the day wore on, various medical staff came and went. Each time, I hoped for someone who might believe me, but each face held the same mix of skepticism and concern. I scrolled through my phone's gallery, my heart sinking as I realized all the photos from that day were gone. Not just the ones I'd taken of the creature, but everything, as if the entire day had been wiped from existence. Late in the afternoon, a gentle knock at the door roused me from my thoughts. A woman in her mid-40s entered, her kind face a welcome change from the skeptical looks I'd been receiving. "Hello, Hannah," she said warmly. "I'm Dr. Melissa Carter, the hospital's psychiatrist. Do you mind if we chat for a bit?" My guard immediately went up. "I'm not crazy," I said flatly. Dr. Carter sat in the chair by my bed, her expression sympathetic. "No one's saying you are, Hannah, but you've been through a traumatic experience. 2, in fact. It's normal to need some help processing that." For the next hour, we talked. Dr. Carter listened without judgment as I recounted my experiences, both the initial attack and my return to the forest. She asked thoughtful questions, never outright dismissing my claims, but gently probing the inconsistencies in my story. As our session drew to a close, Dr. Carter leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. "Hannah, I want you to consider something. The mind is incredibly powerful, especially when dealing with trauma. Is it possible that your experiences, while very real to you, might be your brain's way of coping with a terrifying but more mundane animal attack?" I opened my mouth to argue, but found myself hesitating. The seed of doubt that had been planted earlier began to grow. Could she be right? Was my mind playing tricks on me? The psychiatrist's gentle suggestion of trauma-induced hallucinations felt like a betrayal of everything I knew to be true. But as I sat there, surrounded by the trappings of modern medicine and rational thought, my certainty began to waver. I don't know," I finally admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I was so sure, but now—" Dr. Carter nodded encouragingly. "It's okay to be unsure, Hannah. Healing takes time, and understanding our experiences is part of that process. I'd like to continue working with you if you're open to it." I nodded numbly, suddenly feeling very small and very alone. As Dr. Carter left, the last rays of sunlight were fading from my hospital room window. I stared out at the darkening sky, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. I was released from the hospital with a prescription for anti-anxiety medication and the growing certainty that I was utterly alone in my knowledge of the truth. Or was it the truth? For the first time since my ordeal began, I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew. As I prepared to leave the hospital, one thought echoed in my mind. If I couldn't trust my own memories, my own experiences, what could I trust? The world suddenly felt like a much more uncertain and dangerous place. Little did I know my journey was far from over. The line between reality and imagination was about to blur even further, challenging not just my beliefs but my very sense of self. The morning after my release from the hospital, I found myself standing at the edge of the forest one last time, both longing for and dreading another encounter with the creature that had changed my life. The trees loomed before me, their shadows stretching across the ground like grasping fingers. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig, sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. I hadn't planned on coming here. In fact, I had promised myself, the doctors, and my worried family that I would stay far away from this place. But something had drawn me back, a need for closure? Understanding? I wasn't sure. This is crazy, I muttered to myself, wrapping my arms tightly around my body. What am I even doing here? The wind whispered through the leaves, carrying what sounded like a distant, inhuman growl that made my hair stand on end. My heart raced, and I took an involuntary step backward. Was it real, or just my imagination playing tricks on me again? "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting it. If the creature was out there, I had just announced my presence. If it wasn't, well, then I was talking to myself in the woods like a lunatic. Silence answered me, broken only by the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant call of a bird. I stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, straining my ears for any sound that might indicate the presence of something. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, I realized the futility of what I was doing. Even if the creature was real, even if it was out there somewhere, what did I hope to accomplish? I had no camera, no way to prove anything. And hadn't I learned my lesson about venturing into these woods alone? With a heavy sigh, I turned my back on the wilderness, knowing that somewhere out there, Bigfoot was watching and waiting for its next victim. Or was it? The seed of doubt that had been planted in the hospital had taken root, growing with each passing hour. As I walked back to my car, my mind raced with conflicting thoughts. Had it all been real? The attacks, the chase, the terror? Or had my mind, as the doctors suggested, created an elaborate fantasy to cope with a more mundane but still traumatic animal attack? I reached my beat-up Honda and paused, my hand on the door handle. For a moment, I was tempted to turn around, to march back into those woods and demand answers from the universe. But the rational part of my brain, the part that had been listening to the doctors and psychiatrists, held me back. "It's over, Hannah," I said aloud, my voice sounding small and uncertain even to my own ears. "Time to go home." As I drove away from the town, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed by something just out of sight. Every time I checked my rearview mirror, I half expected to see a massive, hairy figure loping along behind my car, but there was never anything there, just the empty road stretching out behind me. The drive gave me time to think, to try and make sense of everything that had happened over the past 48 hours. It felt like a lifetime had passed since I first set out on that ill-fated hike. Now, here I was, leaving town with more questions than answers. I stopped at a gas station just outside of Missoula, needing to stretch my legs and clear my head. As I filled up the tank, a news report on the small TV above the pump caught my attention. Local authorities have called off the search for evidence of the alleged Bigfoot sighting in the Bitterroot National Forest, the reporter was saying. Despite extensive efforts, no trace of the creature described by hiker Hannah Evans was found. Officials maintain that the incident was likely a case of mistaken identity, possibly involving a bear or other large wildlife. I winced at hearing my name, remembering the disbelief and barely concealed amusement I'd faced when telling my story. The report continued, showing a brief clip of Sheriff Dawson. "While we take all reports seriously, we have to focus our resources on real threats to public safety," the sheriff was saying. "At this time, we consider the matter closed." A wave of frustration washed over me. How could they just dismiss everything that had happened? But then again, what choice did they have? I had no proof, no evidence, nothing but my own increasingly uncertain memories. As I crossed the state line, leaving Montana behind, I felt a strange mix of relief and regret. Part of me was glad to be putting distance between myself and the scene of my terrifying encounters. But another part felt like I was running away, abandoning a mystery that I alone could solve. I thought back to Dr. Carter's words in the hospital. "Trauma affects us all differently, Hannah," she had said. "What matters now is how you choose to move forward." Move forward. The words echoed in my mind as the miles ticked by. But how could I move forward when I wasn't even sure what I was moving forward from? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the highway, I found myself talking aloud, trying to make sense of my experiences. "Okay, Hannah, let's think this through," I said, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Either you encountered a creature that science says doesn't exist, twice, and somehow managed to escape with your life. Or your mind created an elaborate scenario to deal with a traumatic, but more ordinary animal attack." Both options seemed equally impossible, equally terrifying in their own ways. A sign for a rest stop appeared ahead, and I decided to pull over. I needed a moment to collect myself before continuing my journey. As I sat in the quiet car, watching the last rays of sunlight disappear behind the horizon, I made a decision. "It doesn't matter," I said firmly. "Real or not, it happened to me, and I'm the one who has to live with it." I took out my phone and pulled up Dr. Carter's contact information. My finger hovered over the call button for a moment before I pressed it. "Dr. Carter's office," a friendly voice answered. "Hi, this is Hannah Evans," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I'd like to schedule a follow-up appointment with Dr. Carter, please." As I set up the appointment, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I didn't have all the answers, and maybe I never would. But I was taking a step towards understanding, towards healing. I started the car and pulled back onto the highway. The memory of those terrifying encounters would haunt me for the rest of my days, but I was determined not to let them define me. As I drove into the gathering darkness, a flicker of movement in the tree line caught my eye. For a split second, I thought I saw a large, shadowy figure watching me from the forest's edge. My heart raced and I gripped the steering wheel tighter. But when I looked again, there was nothing there. Just trees and shadows playing tricks on my tired eyes. Or was it? The uncertainty, I realized, would always be there. But so would my determination to move forward, to find a way to live with the experience that had changed me forever. As the lights of the next town appeared on the horizon, I took a deep breath and pressed down on the accelerator. Whatever lay ahead, whatever the truth might be, I was ready to face it. The story of my encounter with Bigfoot, real or imagined, had come to an end. But my journey of understanding and healing was just beginning. I never thought a simple hiking trip would change my life forever. My name is Steve Carter, and this is the story of how I encountered something that shouldn't exist, a creature that haunts my nightmares to this day. It was a crisp autumn morning when I arrived at Olympic National Park in Washington. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, a smell I usually found comforting. But that day, it seemed to carry an undercurrent of something off. I shrugged it off as pre-hike jitters and shouldered my backpack. "You sure you don't want company, Steve?" my buddy Mike had asked when I told him about my solo trip. "Those trails can get pretty isolated." I'd laughed it off. "That's the point, man. I need some time to clear my head, you know." If only I'd listened to him. The trailhead was quiet as I set out, the gravel crunching beneath my boots. I'd chosen a less popular route, hoping to avoid the weekend crowds. The path wound through towering evergreens, their branches forming a cathedral-like canopy overhead. Shafts of sunlight pierced through, dappling the forest floor. For the first few hours, it was everything I'd hoped for. The rhythmic sound of my footsteps and the occasional bird call were the only things breaking the silence. I stopped for lunch at a small clearing, savoring the solitude as I munched on my trail mix. It was as I was packing up that I first felt it, a prickling sensation at the back of my neck like I was being watched. I scanned the tree line but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Still, an uneasy feeling settled in my gut. "Get it together, Carter," I muttered to myself. "You're just not used to being alone out here." I pressed on, but the feeling persisted. The forest seemed to grow denser, the shadows deeper. I checked my map, frowning. I should have reached a small stream by now, but there was no sound of running water. With a sinking feeling, I realized I must have strayed from the marked trail. "Shit," I hissed, turning in a slow circle. The trees all looked the same, their trunks disappearing into the gloom. I pulled out my compass, trying to orient myself, but my hands were shaking. That's when I heard it, a twig snapping somewhere behind me. I whirled around, my heart pounding. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and afraid. "Is someone there?" Silence answered me, but it felt heavy, expectant. I took a step back, leaves crunching under my feet. Another snap, closer this time. And then another. "This isn't funny," I shouted, fear making my voice crack. "If someone's out there, show yourself." The air grew thick with an unfamiliar, musky scent that made my nostrils flare in disgust. It was animal, but not like anything I'd encountered before. Not bear, not deer, not anything I could name. My skin crawled as I realized whatever was out there was big, really big. I fumbled for my backpack, cursing myself for packing the bear spray so deep inside. The snapping sounds were all around me now, circling. I spun in place, trying to keep my eyes on every direction at once. "Stay calm," I whispered to myself, my breath coming in short gasps. "It's probably just a bear. Make yourself big. Make noise." I raised my arms, trying to look larger. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the trees. "Get out of here. Go on. Get." For a moment, everything went still. The forest held its breath. Then I saw it, a massive dark shape moving between the trees. It was too tall to be a bear, too bulky to be a man. My mind reeled, refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. "No," I breathed. "It can't be." The shape moved again, and this time I caught a glimpse of matted fur, of long arms ending in wickedly curved claws. My legs turned to jelly and I staggered backward. That's when I heard the growl, a sound so deep and primal, it seemed to vibrate through the earth itself. It was nothing like the documentaries, nothing like the hoaxed recordings. This was real, and it was terrifying. "Oh God," I whimpered, all thoughts of standing my ground forgotten. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear. The creature stepped into a shaft of fading sunlight, and I saw its face. Flat nose, prominent brow, eyes that gleamed with an intelligence that was anything but human. It was the face from 1,000 blurry photographs from countless campfire stories. Bigfoot. But this was no gentle giant, no misunderstood forest dweller. The hatred in its eyes, the way its lips pulled back to reveal yellowed fangs, this was a predator, and I was its prey. "Please," I whispered, though I knew it was futile. This thing wasn't here to communicate, it wanted blood. The beast's muscles bunched and I knew it was about to charge. In that moment, survival instinct finally kicked in. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush with no thought for direction or stealth. Behind me, I heard trees groaning as the creature gave chase. Branches whipped at my face as I tore through the forest. My lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, but terror kept me moving. The sound of pursuit was constant, breaking branches, heavy footfalls, that bone-chilling growl. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately regretted it. The monster was closer than I'd thought, its long arms reaching for me. I put on an extra burst of speed, but I knew I couldn't outrun it forever. As the light faded from the sky, turning the forest into a maze of shadows, I realized with growing dread that I was completely lost. Each tree looked the same as the last, each path as unfamiliar as the one before. I had no idea if I was running deeper into the wilderness or toward salvation. The weight of my backpack slowed me down, but I didn't dare stop to shed it. My bear spray was in there, my only potential weapon against this nightmare, if I could just find a moment to dig it out. But there was no time. No time to think. No time to plan. There was only the pounding of my heart, the burning in my muscles, and the terrifying certainty that death was right behind me. As night fell completely, transforming the forest into a realm of darkness and terror, I knew that my ordeal was far from over. The beast's growls seemed to come from everywhere at once, disorienting me. I stumbled on, driven by pure adrenaline, knowing that to stop would mean certain death. Little did I know the true horror was yet to come. As I plunged deeper into the pitch-black forest, I was running headlong into a nightmare beyond anything I could have imagined. The darkness of the forest was absolute. My lungs burned with each ragged breath as I stumbled through the undergrowth, branches clawing at my face and arms. I had no idea how long I'd been running, but the sounds of pursuit had faded, leaving only the thundering of my own heartbeat in my ears. I slowed to a stop, bent double, trying to catch my breath. The night air was cold against my sweat-soaked skin, and I shivered uncontrollably. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I realized I was in a small clearing. Pale moonlight filtered through the canopy, casting eerie shadows that seemed to writhe and twist. "Get it together, Steve," I whispered to myself, my voice hoarse and trembling. "You lost it. It's gone. You're okay." But even as I said the words, I knew they were a lie. The forest was too quiet. No crickets chirping, no owls hooting. It was as if every living thing was holding its breath, waiting. I fumbled with my backpack, hands shaking as I searched for my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, and I swept it around the clearing, half expecting to see glowing eyes staring back at me. Nothing. "Okay," I muttered, trying to steady my nerves. "Okay, you need to find your way back to the trail. Just pick a direction and stick to it." I chose what I hoped was east and started walking, keeping my movements as quiet as possible. Every snapping twig under my feet sounded like a gunshot in the stillness. That's when I heard it. A low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I froze, my blood turning to ice in my veins. "No," I breathed. "No, no, no." The growl came again, closer this time. Unmistakable, primal, hungry. I'll never forget the sound of Bigfoot's growl as it charged at me from the trees. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before. Part bear, part lion, but with an otherworldly quality that spoke to something ancient and terrifying. My flashlight beam caught a glimpse of movement, a massive, dark shape hurtling towards me with terrifying speed. In that split second, I saw matted fur, impossibly long arms, and eyes that gleamed with a predatory intelligence. Terror jolted through me like an electric shock. I turned to run, but my foot caught on a root and I went down hard. Pain exploded in my ankle, but adrenaline pushed it aside. I scrambled to my feet, abandoning my flashlight in my panic. The creature's roar was deafening now, right behind me. I could feel its hot breath on the back of my neck, spurring me into a desperate sprint. Branches whipped at my face as I tore through the underbrush, but I barely felt them. All that mattered was escape. "Help!" I screamed, though I knew it was futile. There was no one out here, no one to hear me. "Somebody, please." I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. The beast was mere feet away, its massive form blocking out what little moonlight filtered through the trees. Its eyes gleamed with primal hunger as it bore down on me, leaving me paralyzed with fear. In that moment, I was certain I was going to die. This thing, this impossible creature that shouldn't exist, was going to tear me apart in this god-forsaken forest, and no one would ever know what happened to me. The thought of my family, of never seeing them again, gave me a sudden burst of energy. I veered sharply to the right, ducking under a low-hanging branch. The monster's roar of frustration told me I'd bought myself a few precious seconds. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. Every breath was agony, my lungs screaming for air. But I couldn't stop. Stopping meant death. I burst through a thicket and found myself at the edge of a steep incline. Without hesitation, I threw myself down it, half running, half sliding through the leaf litter. Behind me, I could hear trees cracking and splintering as the beast barreled through in pursuit. At the bottom of the hill, I stumbled into a shallow stream. The cold water shocked me back to full alertness, and I realized I had a choice to make. Following the stream might throw off my scent, but it would slow me down. Going back into the woods might give me cover, but the creature clearly knew its way around better than I did. The decision was made for me as I heard a tremendous crash behind me. I looked back to see the monster sliding down the hill, its claws leaving deep gouges in the earth. Its eyes locked onto mine, and I saw nothing but murderous intent. I splashed across the stream and into the trees on the other side, my sodden boots squelching with every step. The forest seemed to close in around me, branches grabbing at my clothes, roots threatening to trip me with every stride. My lungs burned for air, but I didn't dare slow down. I could hear the creature's thunderous footsteps, always just behind me. It was toying with me, I realized. It could have caught me at any time, but it was drawing out the chase, savoring my fear. "Please," I gasped, though I don't know who I was begging. "God, the universe, the monster itself. Please just let me go." As if in answer, I heard a terrifying sound. The whistle of something cutting through the air behind me. I ducked instinctively and felt a rush of wind over my head. A massive tree branch crashed to the ground just in front of me, thrown with incredible force. I veered around it, but the momentary slowdown was all the creature needed. I felt a searing pain across my back as its claws found their mark, tearing through my jacket and into my flesh. I screamed in agony, stumbling forward. The pain was excruciating, but the fear of what would happen if I fell was even greater. Somehow, I kept my feet under me, kept moving. Through a gap in the trees, I caught a glimpse of moonlight reflecting off water. A lake or a wide river. It was my only chance. If I could just reach it, maybe I could. My train of thought was cut off as I felt the creature's massive hand close around my ankle. The world spun as I was yanked off my feet, lifted into the air as easily as a rag doll. I found myself face to face with the monster, close enough to see every detail of its grotesque features. Its foul breath washed over me as it roared, revealing yellowed fangs the size of hunting knives. This close, the stench of its matted fur was overwhelming, a mixture of wet dog, rotting vegetation, and something metallic that might have been old blood. Time seemed to slow down. I was certain these were my last moments alive, but as the creature drew back its free arm, claws extended for what would surely be a killing blow, a distant sound cut through the night, voices, and the barking of dogs. The monster's head snapped towards the sound, its grip on my ankle loosening just a fraction. It was all I needed. With strength born of sheer desperation, I twisted in its grasp and kicked out with my free leg, catching it square in the face. To my shock, it worked. The creature bellowed in pain and anger, dropping me to the forest floor. I hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from my lungs. But I didn't hesitate. I scrambled to my feet and ran, not daring to look back. The voices were louder now, and I realized they were calling my name. A search party. They were looking for me. "Here!" I tried to shout, but it came out as little more than a croak. "I'm here!" Behind me, I heard the monster crashing through the underbrush, but it seemed to be moving away from the voices. As much as it wanted to kill me, it apparently wasn't willing to risk being seen. I staggered towards the sound of the search party, my body screaming in protest with every step. Blood soaked the back of my shredded jacket, and each movement sent waves of agony through me. But I kept going, driven by the desperate need to reach safety, to put this nightmare behind me. As I broke through the tree line and saw the bobbing flashlights of the search party in the distance, I allowed myself to believe, for the first time, that I might actually survive this. But even as relief washed over me, I knew that the memory of this night, of those terrifying eyes and razor-sharp claws, would haunt me for the rest of my life. Little did I know my ordeal was far from over. The chase might have ended, but the true horror of what I'd experienced, and the battle to make anyone believe me, was only just beginning. The search party's voices faded behind me as I plunged deeper into the forest. I knew I should have run towards them, towards safety, but blind panic had taken over. The creature's roar still echoed in my ears, and all I could think about was putting as much distance between myself and that monster as possible. Branches whipped at my face as I tore through the underbrush, leaving stinging cuts across my cheeks and forehead. My lungs burned, desperate for air, but I couldn't slow down. The thunderous footsteps behind me were a constant reminder of the death that pursued me. "Come on, Steve," I gasped to myself between ragged breaths. You can't let it catch you." I could hear trees cracking and splintering as the beast barreled through the forest in pursuit. It was gaining on me, its inhuman strength and stamina far outpacing my own. The realization sent a fresh surge of adrenaline through my system, pushing my battered body to its limits. In the darkness, I barely registered the change in terrain until it was too late. My foot caught on an exposed root, sending me sprawling. I hit the ground hard, the impact driving what little air remained from my lungs. For a moment I lay there dazed and winded, the world spinning around me. The sound of heavy breathing and the stench of wet fur snapped me back to reality. I rolled onto my back, my eyes widening in horror as I saw the massive shape of Bigfoot looming over me, silhouetted against the night sky. Its eyes gleamed with predatory hunger, lips pulled back in a snarl that revealed yellowed fangs. I scrambled backward, my hands scrabbling in the dirt for anything I could use as a weapon. My fingers closed around a hefty branch, and I swung it wildly at the creature's face. To my shock, it connected. The beast roared in pain and anger, stumbling back a step. It was all the opening I needed. I scrambled to my feet and took off running again, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. "Help!" I screamed, though I knew it was futile. The search party was long out of earshot, and there was no one else in these godforsaken woods. "Somebody, please." My cries were answered only by the creature's enraged howl. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. The monster was right behind me, its long arms reaching out, claws glinting in the moonlight. I could see the murderous intent in its eyes, the promise of a slow and painful death if it caught me. I put on an extra burst of speed, my legs burning with the effort. Branches and thorns tore at my clothes and skin, but I barely felt it. The pain was nothing compared to the terror that drove me forward. As I ran, my mind raced, trying to come up with some plan, some way to escape. But every idea seemed futile against this relentless predator. It knew these woods far better than I did, could see in the dark, could probably smell my fear-soaked sweat from a mile away. I burst through a thicket and found myself in a small clearing. Moonlight illuminated a steep rocky outcropping on the far side. For a split second I hesitated. Climbing would slow me down, make me an easy target. But staying on level ground wasn't working either. The decision was made for me as I heard the creature crashing through the undergrowth behind me. I sprinted for the rocks, my hands and feet finding purchase on the rough surface as I scrambled upward. I was halfway up when I heard a sound that chilled my blood, not the roar or growl I'd become accustomed to, but a low, guttural chuckle. The thing was laughing at me, amused by my pathetic attempts to escape. I looked down and immediately regretted it. The beast stood at the base of the outcropping, its massive form dwarfing the boulders around it. With horrifying ease, it began to climb, covering in seconds what had taken me nearly a minute. "No, no, no," I muttered, redoubling my efforts. My fingers were bleeding, nails torn and ragged from clawing at the rock face, but I didn't care. All that mattered was reaching the top, finding some way to escape this nightmare. I hauled myself over the edge of the outcropping, gasping for breath, but there was no time to rest. I could hear the creature's heavy breathing, the scrape of its claws on stone as it neared the top. The other side of the outcropping dropped away sharply, a near vertical descent into darkness. To my left, the rocky ledge continued, winding its way along the hillside. It was narrow, treacherous in the dim light, but it was my only option. I had taken no more than a few steps along the ledge when I heard the monster pull itself onto the outcropping behind me. Its roar of triumph quickly turned to one of rage as it spotted me. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. I grabbed a loose rock and hurled it at the creature. It bounced harmlessly off its broad chest, only serving to enrage it further. I turned and ran along the ledge, my feet slipping on loose gravel. The path was barely wide enough for me. How the massive beast behind me managed to follow, I'll never know. But follow it did, its heavy footsteps shaking the very rock beneath my feet. The ledge curved around the hillside, and as I rounded the bend, my heart sank. Dead end. The path terminated in a sheer drop, a dark void that promised certain death. I spun around, pressing my back against the rock face. The creature advanced slowly now, savoring my fear. In the moonlight, I could see every horrific detail. The matted fur, the powerful muscles rippling beneath its skin, the cruel intelligence in its eyes. "Please," I whispered, though I knew it was useless. This thing wasn't here to negotiate. It wanted blood, and it had me cornered. As it drew back one massive arm, claws extended for what would surely be a killing blow, desperation gave me one last crazy idea. I waited until the last possible second, then ducked and rolled between its legs. The creature's roar of frustration was deafening as its claws struck stone where my head had been a moment before. I scrambled to my feet and ran back the way we'd come, my legs shaking with exhaustion. Behind me, I heard stone crumbling, followed by a bellow of surprise and anger. I chanced to look back and saw that the ledge had given way under the monster's weight. It was clinging to the edge with one hand, its legs dangling over the abyss. For a moment, our eyes met. I saw the hatred there, the promise that if it survived, it would hunt me to the ends of the earth. Then I turned and ran, leaving the sound of crumbling rock and enraged howls behind me. I don't know how long I ran after that. Time seemed to blur, marked only by the burning in my lungs and the ache in my muscles. When I finally allowed myself to slow down, I found myself in an unfamiliar part of the forest, with no idea which direction would lead me to safety. As the adrenaline began to fade, the pain set in. My body was a mass of cuts and bruises, and the gashes on my back from the creature's claws burned like fire. I was exhausted, disoriented, and still terrified that at any moment I'd hear that bone-chilling growl again. But as I stood there, swaying on my feet and fighting to stay conscious, I realized something. For the first time since this nightmare began, the forest around me wasn't silent. I could hear crickets chirping, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Normal nighttime sounds. Was it over? Had I actually managed to escape? I wanted to believe it, but a part of me knew better. This thing, this monster, wasn't going to give up so easily. It was out there somewhere, nursing its wounds, biding its time. And when night fell again, the hunt would resume. With that chilling thought, I forced my battered body into motion once more. I had to find my way out of this forest, had to reach safety before the creature recovered. Because I knew with bone-deep certainty that if it caught me again, there would be no escape. As I stumbled through the darkened woods, every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every sound a harbinger of doom. The chase might have paused, but the true ordeal was far from over. And as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The first light of dawn was breaking through the trees, casting long shadows across the forest floor. I had been stumbling through the woods for what felt like hours, my body pushed far beyond its limits. Every step was agony, my muscles screaming in protest, but the fear of what lurked in the darkness behind me kept me moving. I paused for a moment, leaning against a tree to catch my breath. My throat was raw from breathing the cold morning air, and my mouth was parched. I fumbled for my water bottle, only to realize I had lost my backpack somewhere during the frantic chase. The realization hit me hard. No water, no food, no first aid kit. I was completely unprepared for this nightmare. "Get it together, Steve," I muttered to myself, my voice hoarse and barely recognizable. "You've got to keep moving. Find a way out." As I pushed off from the tree, a wave of dizziness washed over me. The lack of sleep, food, and water was taking its toll. I stumbled forward, my vision blurring at the edges. That's when I heard it, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the very earth beneath my feet. My blood ran cold. It couldn't be. Not after everything I'd been through. Not when I was so close to escaping. I turned slowly, praying that it was just my imagination, that the trauma of the night had finally caused me to hallucinate. But there it was. Emerging from the shadows between the trees, the monster that had haunted my every step since this ordeal began. Bigfoot stood before me, its massive form even more terrifying in the half-light of dawn. Its fur was matted with dirt, and what looked horribly like dried blood. Its eyes, those intelligent, hate-filled eyes, were fixed on me with predatory focus. "No," I whispered, my voice cracking with fear. "Please, no." The creature's lips pulled back in a snarl, revealing those yellowed fangs that had featured so prominently in my nightmares. It took a step forward, and I instinctively backed away. "Stay back," I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. I cast about desperately for something, anything I could use as a weapon. My hand closed around a fallen branch and I brandished it like a club. "I'm warning you." The monster's response was a roar that shook the leaves from the trees. Before I could react, it charged at me with terrifying speed. I swung the branch wildly, but it was like trying to stop a freight train with a toothpick. I screamed in agony as Bigfoot's massive hand closed around my ankle, yanking me off my feet. The world spun as I was lifted into the air, coming face to face with the creature's grotesque, snarling visage. Its foul breath washed over me as it roared, the stench nearly making me gag. Up close, I could see every horrific detail: the matted fur, the scars crisscrossing its face, the inhuman intelligence burning in its eyes. "Let me go," I yelled, thrashing in its grip. But it was useless. The creature's strength was unimaginable, its hold on me unbreakable. With a casual flick of its arm, it sent me flying. Pain exploded through my body as I slammed against a tree trunk, the impact knocking the wind from my lungs. I crumpled to the ground, gasping for air. Through the haze of pain, I saw the monster advancing on me. Each step it took shook the ground, fallen leaves crunching under its massive feet. I tried to crawl away, but my body wouldn't respond. I was trapped, helpless. As the creature loomed over me, I thought of my family, of all the things I'd never get to do or say. Tears stung my eyes as I realized this was how it would end. Alone in the woods, torn apart by a monster no one would believe existed. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though to whom, I wasn't sure. Maybe to my parents, who would never know what happened to me. Maybe to myself, for being foolish enough to come out here alone. The beast reached down, its claws glinting in the early morning light. I closed my eyes, bracing for the end. But instead of the killing blow I expected, I felt those massive fingers wrap around my throat, lifting me off the ground. My eyes flew open as I gasped for air. The creature held me at arm's length, studying me with an almost curious expression. For a moment, I dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, it would let me go. That hope was shattered as I saw its other hand draw back, claws extended. Time seemed to slow down. I saw every detail with crystal clarity: the flex of its muscles, the cruel glint in its eyes, the way the sunlight caught on its razor-sharp claws. Pain exploded across my chest as those claws raked across me, tearing through my jacket and into my flesh. I screamed, the sound strangled by the hand still gripping my throat. The monster's eyes seemed to light up at my pain, a terrible intelligence shining through. It drew back its hand again, and I knew that this time it would be the killing blow. In that moment, survival instinct took over. My hand fumbled at my belt, searching for anything that might save me. My fingers closed around a small canister, my bear spray, miraculously still attached to my belt loop. With the last of my strength, I aimed the canister at the creature's face and pressed down hard on the trigger. The effect was instantaneous. A cloud of burning mist enveloped the monster's head, and its roar of rage turned to one of pain. The hand around my throat loosened, and I dropped to the ground, gasping and coughing. Through watering eyes, I saw the beast stumbling backward, clawing at its face. It bellowed in agony, a sound that shook the trees and sent birds scattering from their perches. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. Ignoring the searing pain in my chest, I scrambled to my feet and ran. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me, but I didn't slow down. The creature's agonized howls spurred me on, filling me with a desperate energy I didn't know I possessed. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost all meaning, reduced to the rhythm of my feet pounding against the earth and the ragged sound of my breathing. My chest burned, blood soaking through what remained of my shredded jacket, but the fear of what lay behind me pushed me beyond my limits. It wasn't until I burst out of the tree line onto a gravel road that I allowed myself to slow down. My legs gave out, and I collapsed to my knees, every breath sending waves of agony through my battered body. As I knelt there, trembling and gasping for air, I realized that the sounds of pursuit had faded. The forest behind me was quiet, save for the normal sounds of birds and small animals. Had I actually managed to escape? I turned to look back at the woods, half expecting to see the monster emerging from the shadows. But there was nothing. Just trees and underbrush, looking deceptively peaceful in the morning light. A hysterical laugh bubbled up from my chest, quickly turning into a sob. I was alive. Somehow, against all odds, I had survived. But as the adrenaline began to fade and the full extent of my injuries made themselves known, I realized my ordeal was far from over. I was miles from anywhere, badly injured, and with no idea which direction would lead me to safety. And somewhere out there, nursing its wounds and its rage, was a creature that defied explanation, a monster that I knew would haunt my nightmares for years to come. As I struggled to my feet, swaying with exhaustion and blood loss, I knew that my next challenge would be not just finding help, but convincing anyone of what I had experienced. Because who would believe that Bigfoot was real, let alone that it was a vicious, intelligent predator? With that daunting thought, I began to limp down the gravel road, every step a battle against pain and fatigue. The sun climbed higher in the sky, promising a new day. But for me, the darkness of the night's events still clung close, a shadow I feared I might never fully escape. The gravel crunched under my feet as I stumbled down the road, each step sending waves of pain through my battered body. The sun had climbed higher in the sky, its warmth a stark contrast to the cold fear that still gripped my heart. I didn't know how long I'd been walking, but it felt like hours. My mind was foggy from exhaustion and blood loss, and more than once I found myself swaying on the verge of collapse. "Keep going," I muttered to myself, my voice barely a whisper. "You have to keep going, Steve." I tried to focus on putting one foot in front of the other, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the creature. Even now, I could hardly believe what had happened. Bigfoot. It was real, and it had nearly killed me. The memory of its roar, the feel of its claws raking across my chest, it was all too vivid, too terrifying to be a dream. A sound in the distance made me freeze. Was that an engine? I strained my ears, hardly daring to hope. Yes, there it was again, the unmistakable rumble of a vehicle approaching. "Hey!" I tried to shout, but it came out as little more than a croak. I waved my arms frantically, ignoring the pain that shot through my torn muscles. "Over here! Help!" As the vehicle, a pickup truck I realized, came into view, I felt a surge of relief so strong it nearly brought me to my knees. The truck slowed as it approached, and I saw the driver's eyes widen in shock as he took in my appearance. "Jesus Christ," the man said as he jumped out of the truck. He was in his 50s with a weathered face and kind eyes. "What the hell happened to you, son?" I opened my mouth to explain, but the words wouldn't come. How could I possibly describe what I'd been through? Instead, I felt my legs give way beneath me. The last thing I remember is the man rushing forward to catch me as darkness closed in. I drifted in and out of consciousness, catching snippets of conversation and flashes of movement. The rumble of the truck's engine. A woman's voice, high with concern. "Call an ambulance." The wail of sirens in the distance. When I finally came to fully, I was in a hospital bed. The stark white walls and the antiseptic smell were a jarring contrast to the wild terror of the forest. For a moment, I wondered if it had all been a nightmare. But then I tried to move, and the pain that lanced through my body confirmed that it had been all too real. A nurse noticed I was awake and hurried over. "Mr. Carter, how are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck," I croaked, my throat dry and raw. She gave me a sympathetic smile as she checked my vitals. "You've been through quite an ordeal. You're lucky Mr. Johnson found you when he did." Before I could respond, the door opened and a doctor walked in, followed by a man in a ranger's uniform. "Mr. Carter, I'm Dr. Patel," the doctor said, picking up my chart. "You've got some nasty lacerations and a mild concussion, but you're going to be okay. Can you tell us what happened?" I hesitated, looking from the doctor to the ranger. How could I explain without sounding completely insane? But I knew I had to try. They needed to know what was out there. I was attacked," I began, my voice shaking. "In the forest. It was Bigfoot." The silence that followed was deafening. I saw the doctor and nurse exchange a glance, while the ranger's expression hardened. "Mr. Carter," the ranger said, his tone carefully neutral, "I'm Ranger Collins. Can you be more specific about what attacked you?" "I know how it sounds," I said, frustration creeping into my voice. "But I'm telling you, it was Bigfoot. It was huge, covered in fur. It chased me through the forest, tried to kill me. I only escaped because I managed to spray it with bear spray." Dr. Patel cleared his throat. "Steve, you've been through a traumatic experience. Sometimes in high-stress situations our minds can play tricks on us." "No," I interrupted, trying to sit up despite the pain. "I know what I saw. It was real. You have to believe me. There's a monster out there in those woods." Ranger Collins stepped forward, his face a mask of professional concern. "Mr. Carter, we take all reports of animal attacks seriously, but I've been patrolling these forests for 20 years, and I can assure you, there's no such thing as Bigfoot. Now, is it possible that what you encountered was a bear?" I shook my head vehemently. It wasn't a bear. It walked on two legs. It was intelligent, evil. You have to send someone out there to find it before it hurts someone else. The doctor placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, easing me back onto the bed. "Steve, you need to rest. You've lost a lot of blood, and your body has been through severe trauma. We'll talk more when you're feeling better." As they turned to leave, I called out desperately, "Wait! You have to believe me. Check the forest. You'll find evidence. Footprints, claw marks on the trees. Something." Ranger Collins paused at the door. "We'll conduct a thorough investigation, Mr. Carter. Try not to worry. You're safe now." But as the door closed behind them, I could see the doubt in their eyes. They didn't believe me. To them, I was just another hiker who'd had an accident and let his imagination run wild. I sank back into the pillows, despair washing over me. I knew what I'd seen, what I'd experienced. The terror had been real. The pain was real. But how could I prove it? The creature had disappeared into the forest, leaving no trace but the wounds on my body. And even those, I realized with a sinking feeling, could be explained away as the result of a fall or an encounter with a more mundane predator. As I lay there, my mind raced. What if the creature was still out there, hunting other unsuspecting hikers? What if it came looking for me to finish what it had started? The thought sent a chill down my spine. I knew then that this was far from over. Even though I had escaped with my life, the real battle was just beginning. I had to make them believe me, had to find some way to prove that what I'd seen was real. Because if I couldn't, if Bigfoot remained nothing more than a legend, then no one would be prepared for the true horror that lurked in those woods. As exhaustion finally overtook me and I drifted off into a fitful sleep, One thought echoed through my mind. I had survived the attack, but the nightmare was far from over. The real challenge lay ahead, convincing a world of skeptics that monsters were real and that I had come face to face with one of them. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the first thing I became aware of as I drifted back to consciousness. For a blissful moment, I couldn't remember where I was or why I was there. Then it all came rushing back. The forest, the chase, the monster. Bigfoot. My eyes snapped open and I found myself staring at the sterile white ceiling of the hospital room. I tried to sit up, but a sharp pain across my chest forced me back down with a groan. Looking down, I saw bandages covering most of my torso, stark white against my bruised skin. As I gingerly touched the gauze, flashes of the attack played through my mind. The creature's roar, its fetid breath, the searing pain as its claws tore into me. A nurse entered the room, her cheerful demeanor at odds with the turmoil in my mind. "Good morning, Mr. Carter. How are you feeling today?" "Like I've been hit by a truck," I muttered, wincing as I shifted in the bed. "How long have I been here?" "You were brought in yesterday morning," she replied, checking my vitals. "You've been in and out of consciousness since then. The doctor will be by shortly to check on you." As she busied herself around the room, I tried to gather my thoughts. I needed to make them understand what had happened, what was out there in those woods. But how could I explain something so impossible? The door opened again, and Dr. Patel entered, followed by a man in a suit who I didn't recognize. "Mr. Carter, good to see you awake," Dr. Patel said, picking up my chart. "This is Detective Ramirez. He'd like to ask you a few questions about what happened, if you're feeling up to it." I nodded, a mix of relief and apprehension washing over me. Maybe now someone would listen. Detective Ramirez pulled up a chair beside my bed. "Mr. Carter, I understand you've been through a traumatic experience. Can you tell me in your own words what happened in the forest?" I took a deep breath, wincing at the pain in my ribs. I was hiking in Olympic National Park. It was supposed to be a simple overnight trip. But as night fell, I realized I'd strayed from the trail. That's when I heard it. A growl unlike anything I've ever heard before. I paused, seeing the skepticism already forming in the detective's eyes. But I pressed on, determined to make him understand. It was Bigfoot. I know how that sounds, but I swear to you, it was real. It chased me through the forest, toying with me like a cat with a mouse. It was intelligent, Detective. Evil. When it caught me, I shuddered, the memory all too vivid. I thought I was going to die. If I hadn't managed to use my bear spray, I wouldn't be here talking to you now. Detective Ramirez's face remained impassive as he jotted down notes. "And you're certain it wasn't a bear or another large animal?" I shook my head vehemently. It walked on two legs. It was at least 8 feet tall, covered in matted fur. Its face... I trailed off, the image of those hate-filled eyes burning in my memory. It wasn't an animal, Detective. It was something else entirely. Dr. Patel cleared his throat. "Steve, I understand this must have been a terrifying experience, but it's not uncommon for the mind to play tricks on us in high-stress situations." "No," I interrupted, frustration building. "I know what I saw, what I experienced. This wasn't a hallucination or a dream. It was real, and it's still out there." Detective Ramirez leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Mr. Carter, we've had rangers searching the area where you were found. They haven't discovered any unusual tracks or signs of a large unknown creature." "That's impossible," I insisted. "There has to be something. Claw marks on the trees, broken branches, anything." "The only physical evidence we have are your injuries," the detective continued. "And while they're certainly severe, they're consistent with a fall in rough terrain, possibly exacerbated by an encounter with a known predator." I felt a wave of despair wash over me. They didn't believe me. No one was going to believe me. "What about my clothes?" I asked, grasping at straws. "There must be fur or saliva, something you can test." Dr. Patel shook his head. "I'm afraid your clothes were in tatters when you were brought in." They were disposed of as a biohazard. I slumped back against the pillows, feeling utterly defeated. So that's it? You're just going to write this off as a hiking accident? Detective Ramirez stood, tucking away his notepad. We'll continue to investigate, Mr. Carter, but without concrete evidence, there's little more we can do. I'd advise against spreading stories about Bigfoot attacks. It could lead to panic or worse, thrill seekers putting themselves in danger trying to find this creature. As they turned to leave, a thought struck me. Wait, my phone. I had my phone with me. Maybe I managed to get a picture or a video without realizing it. The detective and doctor exchanged a glance. I'm sorry, Steve, Dr. Patel said gently. You didn't have a phone on you when you were found. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. My phone must have fallen out during the chase or the attack. It was still out there in the forest, possibly with the evidence I desperately needed. As the door closed behind them, I was left alone with my thoughts and the growing certainty that no one would ever believe my story. The wounds would heal, the physical pain would fade, but I knew that the memory of what I'd experienced would haunt me forever. I stared out the window at the distant line of trees that marked the edge of the forest. Somewhere out there, the creature was still roaming free. How many other hikers would fall victim before someone finally believed the truth? As night fell and shadows crept across my hospital room, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The attack might have ended, but a new nightmare was just beginning. One where the monster wasn't just in the forest, but in my mind, in my memories. A truth that no one else would accept. I closed my eyes trying to find some peace, but all I could see were those inhuman eyes staring back at me from the darkness. I knew then that even though I had escaped with my life, part of me would always be back in those woods, running from a horror that no one else believed existed. The rhythmic whir of the helicopter's blades filled my ears as we soared over the dense canopy of Olympic National Park. I sat rigid in my seat, my hands clenched tightly in my lap, trying to ignore the pain that still radiated from my chest with every breath. It had been less than 24 hours since my terrifying encounter with Bigfoot, and now I was heading back into the heart of the forest that had nearly claimed my life. You okay there, Mr. Carter? The pilot's voice crackled through my headset. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. How could I explain the cold dread that gripped me as I watched the endless sea of green pass beneath us? Beside me sat Ranger Collins, his face a mask of professional concern. It had taken hours of pleading and arguing to convince him to bring me along on this search. Even now, I could see the doubt in his eyes. We'll be setting down in a clearing about a mile from where you were found, he explained, raising his voice over the noise of the rotors. From there, we'll conduct a ground search. But I want to be clear, Mr. Carter. At the first sign of trouble, we're pulling out. Your safety is our priority. I wanted to laugh at that. Safety? After what I'd been through, the concept seemed almost absurd. But I held my tongue. This might be my only chance to prove that what I'd experienced was real. As we descended, I felt my heart rate quicken. The forest that had once seemed so inviting now loomed ominously, hiding untold horrors beneath its leafy canopy. The moment my feet touched the ground, every instinct screamed at me to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. But I couldn't, not yet. Not until I found proof. Our small search party spread out with Ranger Collins keeping a watchful eye on me. I led them to where I thought the attack had taken place, though in the light of day, everything looked different. This is where it happened, I said, my voice shaking slightly as I pointed to a small clearing. It came at me from those trees over there. Ranger Collins nodded, his expression neutral. All right, let's take a look around. Remember, folks, we're looking for any signs of unusual activity. Large tracks, broken branches, anything out of the ordinary. As the team began to search, I stood rooted to the spot, memories washing over me. I could almost hear the creature's roar echoing through the trees, feel its hot breath on my neck. A shudder ran through me. Mr. Carter? A gentle touch on my arm startled me. It was one of the search team members, a young woman with kind eyes. "Are you all right? You've gone pale." I shook my head, trying to clear it. "I'm fine. It's just being back here." She nodded sympathetically. "I can't imagine what you went through. But you're safe now. We're all here, and we've got tranquilizer guns if we encounter any dangerous wildlife." I almost laughed. Tranquilizer guns against that monster? They might as well be armed with water pistols. As the search continued, my frustration grew. There were no massive footprints, no tufts of coarse fur caught on branches. The forest had swallowed up all evidence of my ordeal, leaving behind only my scars and my increasingly doubted testimony. "I don't understand," I muttered, running a hand through my hair. "It was right here. How can there be nothing?" Ranger Collins approached, his face grim. "Mr. Carter, we've been searching for hours. There's no sign of any unusual activity in this area. No tracks, no fur, no evidence of a struggle beyond what would be consistent with a fall or an encounter with normal wildlife." I felt a surge of desperation. "But my phone, it has to be out here somewhere, if we can find it." "We've swept the area with metal detectors," he interrupted gently. "If your phone was here, we would have found it." The realization hit me like a physical blow. My last hope of proving my story gone. I sank to my knees, ignoring the pain that shot through my injured body. "You have to believe me," I pleaded, looking up at the ranger. "I know what I saw, what I experienced. It was real." Ranger Collins sighed, crouching down beside me. "Steve, I don't doubt that you went through something traumatic out here. But the mind can play tricks on us when we're scared and alone in the wilderness. What you think you saw?" "No," I interrupted, anger flaring. "I didn't imagine this. Look at me." I pulled up my shirt, revealing the bandages covering my chest. "You think I did this to myself? That a fall could cause these kinds of injuries?" The ranger's expression softened. "No one's saying you weren't attacked, Steve. But there are known predators in these woods, bears, cougars. In the dark, in a state of panic, it's easy to misinterpret." I cut him off, struggling to my feet. "It wasn't a bear or a cougar. It was Bigfoot. It was intelligent, it was evil, and it's still out there. Why won't anyone believe me?" The search team had gathered around us, their faces a mixture of pity and skepticism. I looked from one to another, desperately seeking any sign of belief, but found none. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the trees, Ranger Collins made the call to end the search. "It's not safe to be out here after dark," he explained. "We need to head back." As we made our way to the helicopter, I cast one last look over my shoulder at the forest. For a moment, I thought I saw movement in the shadows, a flash of something large and dark. My heart leapt into my throat. "Wait," I called out. "There. Did you see that?" But when I turned back, there was nothing. Just trees and lengthening shadows. The others exchanged worried glances. "Come on, Steve," Ranger Collins said gently, guiding me towards the helicopter. "It's time to go." As we lifted off, I pressed my face to the window, scanning the darkening forest below. I knew the truth, even if no one else did. The monster was down there, hidden in the vast wilderness. And as we flew away, leaving behind the site of my terrifying ordeal, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The helicopter carried us back towards civilization, but my mind remained in those dark woods. I had survived the attack, escaped with my life, but at what cost? My credibility was shattered, my story dismissed as the ravings of a traumatized mind. And somewhere out there, Bigfoot roamed free, a threat that no one was prepared to acknowledge or confront. As the lights of the city came into view, I realized that my real struggle was just beginning. How could I live with the knowledge of what I'd experienced, knowing that no one would ever believe me? The physical wounds would heal, but the memory of those terrifying hours in the forest would haunt me forever. I closed my eyes, trying to find some peace, but all I could see were those inhuman eyes staring back at me from the darkness. The nightmare, I realized, was far from over. It had only just begun. The fluorescent lights of the hospital room buzzed incessantly, a constant reminder of where I was and why. It had been less than 2 days since my encounter with Bigfoot, and already the world was trying to rewrite my experience. I sat on the edge of the bed, my bandaged chest aching with every breath, as I watched the local news report on a small TV mounted in the corner. In local news, a hiker was rescued from Olympic National Park yesterday after what authorities are calling a severe animal attack. Steve Carter, 32, was found wandering along a service road, suffering from multiple lacerations and a concussion. I clenched my fists, frustration building as the anchor continued. While initial reports suggested a possible Bigfoot sighting, park rangers have dismissed these claims as unfounded. Experts believe the attack was likely from a bear or mountain lion. Bullshit, I muttered, reaching for the remote to turn off the TV. As I did, there was a knock at the door. "Come in," I called out, expecting another nurse or doctor. Instead, my best friend Mike walked in, his face a mixture of relief and concern. "Jesus, Steve," he said, taking in my battered appearance. When I got the call, I couldn't believe it. "Are you okay?" I managed a weak smile. "I've been better. Thanks for coming, man." Mike pulled up a chair next to the bed. "Of course, I've been worried sick. What the hell happened out there?" I took a deep breath, wincing at the pain in my ribs. This was it, the moment of truth. If anyone would believe me, it would be Mike. We'd been friends since college, had been on countless hiking trips together. He knew I wasn't prone to exaggeration or flights of fancy. "Mike, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound crazy, but I need you to listen, really listen, because it's the truth and I don't know who else to turn to." He nodded, his expression serious. "I'm all ears, buddy." So I told him everything. The chase through the dark forest, the terrifying roars, the moment I came face to face with the creature. I described its massive form, the intelligence in its eyes, the sheer malevolence I felt emanating from it. As I spoke, I could see the doubt creeping into Mike's eyes, but I pressed on, desperate to make him understand. And then I managed to spray it with the bear spray. That's the only reason I'm alive right now, Mike. If I hadn't had that... I trailed off, the memory of those final moments of terror still too vivid. Mike was silent for a long moment, his brow furrowed in thought. "Steve," he finally said, his voice gentle, "you've been through a traumatic experience. It's natural for the mind to fill in gaps, to try and make sense of things." "No," I interrupted, my voice rising. "Don't you start with that too. I know what I saw, Mike. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a mountain lion. It was Bigfoot." Mike held up his hands in a placating gesture. Okay. I'm just trying to understand. You have to admit it sounds pretty far-fetched." I slumped back against the pillows, feeling utterly defeated. "I know how it sounds, but I swear to you it's the truth. Why would I make this up?" "I'm not saying you're making it up," Mike said carefully. "But maybe in the dark, scared and alone, your mind played tricks on you. It happens, you know?" I shook my head, fighting back tears of frustration. "You don't believe me either." Before Mike could respond, there was another knock at the door. A nurse entered, followed by Dr. Patel and a man I didn't recognize. "Mr. Carter," Dr. Patel said. "How are you feeling? This is Dr. Simmons. He's a psychiatrist I've asked to consult on your case." My heart sank. A psychiatrist. They thought I was crazy. Dr. Simmons stepped forward, a practiced smile on his face. "Hello, Steve. I understand you've been through quite an ordeal. I'd like to talk to you about your experience, if that's all right." I looked from Dr. Simmons to Mike, then back to Dr. Patel. "I'm not crazy," I said, my voice low and intense. "I know what you all think, but I'm telling you the truth." Dr. Simmons nodded sympathetically. "No one's saying you're crazy, Steve. Traumatic experiences can affect us in many ways. Sometimes our minds create explanations to help us cope with things we don't understand. I felt a surge of anger. My mind didn't create anything. I saw it. I felt its claws tearing into me. How can you explain these? I gestured to my bandaged chest. Dr. Patel stepped in. Steve, your injuries are consistent with an animal attack. Possibly a bear. It wasn't a bear, I shouted, immediately regretting it as pain lanced through my chest. Why won't anyone believe me? The room fell silent. I could see the concern in their eyes, the doubt. Even Mike looked uncomfortable, avoiding my gaze. Dr. Simmons cleared his throat. Steve, I'd like to schedule some sessions with you. I think it could be helpful to work through what you experienced. No, I said flatly. I don't need a psychiatrist, I need someone to believe me. The doctors exchanged glances. Dr. Patel sighed. All right, Steve, we won't push you, but the offer stands if you change your mind. As they left the room, Mike stood up. I should go too. Let you get some rest. I nodded, suddenly feeling very tired and very alone. Yeah. Thanks for coming, Mike. He paused at the door. Steve, I'm here for you, man. Whatever you need. Just maybe consider talking to Dr. Simmons. Couldn't hurt, right? I didn't respond, just turned my gaze to the window. After a moment, I heard the door close softly behind him. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the hospital grounds. In the distance, I could see the dark line of the forest. Somewhere out there, the creature was still roaming free. And here I was, trapped not just by my injuries, but by the disbelief of everyone around me. As night fell, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a new kind of nightmare. The physical wounds would heal, but how could I live with the knowledge of what I'd seen, what I'd experienced, when no one would believe me? I closed my eyes, trying to find some peace, but all I could see were those inhuman eyes staring back at me from the darkness. The attack might have ended, but the real ordeal, I realized, was only just beginning. The soft glow of my laptop screen illuminated the dim hospital room as I scrolled through page after page of Bigfoot sightings, conspiracy theories, and blurry photographs. It was well past midnight, but sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those hate-filled, inhuman eyes staring back at me. I had been discharged from the hospital earlier that day, but I couldn't bring myself to go home. The thought of being alone with my thoughts, with the memories of what had happened, was unbearable. So I had checked into a small motel on the outskirts of town, as close to the forest as I dared to get. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I debated whether to share my story on one of the countless Bigfoot forums I had discovered. But what was the point? They'd probably think I was just another crackpot or attention seeker, just like everyone else. A knock at the door startled me out of my thoughts. I glanced at the clock, 2:17 a.m. Who could it be at this hour? Cautiously, I approached the door, my heart racing. Who is it? I called out, my voice shakier than I'd like to admit. Mr. Carter, it's Detective Ramirez. I'd like to speak with you if that's all right. I hesitated for a moment before opening the door. Detective Ramirez stood there, looking as tired as I felt. May I come in? He asked. I nodded, stepping aside to let him enter. As he walked past me, I caught a whiff of coffee and cigarettes. He'd clearly been up all night, too. What's this about, Detective? I asked, closing the door behind him. Have you found something? Ramirez shook his head, his expression grim. Not exactly, Mr. Carter, but there have been developments. I need to ask you a few more questions about what happened in the forest. My heart leapt. Had they finally found evidence? Did they believe me now? Of course, I said, gesturing for him to take a seat at the small table where my laptop sat. What do you need to know? Ramirez pulled out a notepad, his pen poised to write. Mr. Carter, in your initial statement, you mentioned that the creature, Bigfoot, seemed intelligent. Can you elaborate on that? I closed my eyes, trying to push past the fear and focus on the details. It wasn't just animal instinct, I said slowly. The way it moved, the way it hunted me. It was calculated, like it was enjoying the chase. Ramirez nodded, jotting something down. And you're certain it was bipedal, walking on two legs? Absolutely, I said, a shudder running through me at the memory. It was at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. No bear or mountain lion could move like that. The detective was silent for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought. Finally, he looked up at me, his eyes intense. Mr. Carter, what I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room, understood? I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. There's been another attack, Ramirez said, his voice low. A couple camping in the national park. The man was killed, his body. It was bad. The woman is in critical condition. I felt the blood drain from my face. Oh God, I whispered. It's still out there. It's killing people. Ramirez held up a hand. We don't know that it's connected to your incident. The wounds could be consistent with a bear attack. But he trailed off, seeming to debate with himself before continuing. The woman, before she lost consciousness, she said something about a monster, something big, walking on two legs. My legs gave out, and I sank onto the bed. You believe me now? I asked, hardly daring to hope. The detective's expression was carefully neutral. I believe that something is out there, Mr. Carter. Something dangerous. But I can't officially endorse the existence of Bigfoot based on traumatized witness accounts and inconclusive evidence. I felt a surge of frustration. Then why are you here? Why tell me this if you still don't believe me? Ramirez leaned forward, his voice intense. Because I need your help, Mr. Carter. You're the only person who's encountered this thing and survived to tell about it. I need you to come back to the forest with me. I recoiled, terror gripping me. No way, I can't go back there. Listen to me, Ramirez said urgently. People are dying. Whatever this is, bear, mountain lion, or something else, we need to stop it, and you might be our best chance at finding it. I shook my head, my whole body trembling. You don't understand. This isn't some animal we can track and tranquilize. It's intelligent, it's evil. If we go back in there, we're as good as dead. Ramirez stood up, pacing the small room. Then what do you suggest? We can't just let it keep killing people. I ran a hand through my hair, my mind racing. My phone, I said suddenly. It's still out there somewhere. If we can find it, there might be evidence. Pictures or video I took without realizing it. The detective nodded slowly. It's a long shot, but it's something. All right, Mr. Carter. We'll organize a search party at first light, but I need you there to guide us. I closed my eyes, fighting against the wave of panic that threatened to overwhelm me. The thought of going back into those woods, of potentially facing that monster again, was almost unbearable. But I knew I had no choice. I couldn't let anyone else suffer the way I had. Okay, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I'll do it. As Ramirez left to make the necessary arrangements, I turned back to my laptop. The forums and conspiracy sites suddenly seemed childish, irrelevant in the face of the real horror that awaited us. I closed the browser and opened a blank document instead. If something happened to me out there, I wanted there to be a record. A warning. I began to type, my fingers flying over the keys as I poured out every detail of my encounter, every terrifying moment of my ordeal. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the motel window, I saved the document and attached it to an email addressed to Mike. I hesitated for a moment before hitting send, adding a simple message. If you don't hear from me in 24 hours, read this, and please, believe me. I shut the laptop and began to get ready. In a few hours, I would be heading back into the forest that had nearly claimed my life. Back to face a monster that no one believed existed. As I packed a small bag, I couldn't shake the feeling that this time, I might not make it out alive. But I had to try. For the sake of those who had died, and those who might yet fall victim to the creature if we didn't stop it. With a deep breath, I steeled myself for what was to come. The investigation was about to begin, and with it the most terrifying journey of my life. The soft glow of the bedside lamp cast long shadows across my bedroom as I sat on the edge of my bed, staring blankly at the wall. It had been a week since my encounter with Bigfoot, a week since I'd left the hospital, and yet the terror of those moments in the forest still clung to me like a second skin. Sleep had become a distant memory. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those inhuman eyes staring back at me, heard that bone-chilling roar echoing through the trees. The doctors had prescribed sleeping pills, but I was too afraid to take them. What if the monster came while I was drugged and helpless? A sudden noise outside my window made me jump, my heart racing. Logically, I knew I was safe here in my apartment, miles away from the forest. But logic had little power over the primal fear that now ruled my life. I forced myself to stand, wincing at the pain that still radiated from my healing wounds. Slowly, I made my way to the window and peered out into the darkness. Nothing but empty streets and flickering streetlights, no massive, fur-covered shape lurking in the shadows. "Get a grip, Steve," I muttered to myself, running a shaky hand through my hair. "You're safe. It can't get you here." But even as I said the words, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was lying to myself. The creature I'd encountered wasn't just some mindless beast. It was intelligent, cunning. Who was to say it couldn't follow me here, couldn't hunt me down to finish what it had started? A knock at my door startled me out of my dark thoughts. I glanced at the clock. 2:17 a.m. Who could it be at this hour? "Steve? It's Mike. Can I come in?" I hesitated for a moment before moving to unlock the door. Mike stood in the hallway, concern etched on his face. "Jesus, man," he said as he took in my appearance. "You look like hell." I managed a weak smile. "Thanks. Come in." Mike followed me into the living room, his eyes scanning the chaos that had become my apartment. Empty coffee cups littered every surface, and printouts of Bigfoot sightings and cryptozoology articles covered the walls. "Steve," Mike said gently, "this isn't healthy. You need to talk to someone, a professional." I shook my head vehemently. "They'll just tell me I'm crazy, that it was all in my head. But I know what I saw, Mike. What I experienced." Mike sighed, sinking onto the couch. "I know you believe that. But come on, man. Bigfoot, you have to admit how it sounds." "You think I don't know that?" I snapped, immediately regretting my tone. "I'm sorry. It's just, I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back there in the forest. I can smell its breath, feel its claws tearing into me." I lifted my shirt, revealing the angry red scars that crisscrossed my chest. "Does this look like something I imagined?" Mike's eyes widened at the sight of my injuries. "Christ, Steve, I didn't realize it was that bad." "It was worse," I said quietly, lowering my shirt. "If I hadn't had that bear spray, I wouldn't be here talking to you now." A heavy silence fell between us. I could see the conflict in Mike's eyes. He wanted to believe me, to support me, but the rational part of his mind couldn't accept what I was saying. "Look," he said finally, "I can't pretend to understand what you went through out there, but I'm worried about you, man. You can't keep living like this." I turned away, staring out the window at the city lights. "What am I supposed to do, Mike? Just forget it ever happened? Pretend that there isn't a monster out there, something that could be hunting other innocent people right now?" "No," Mike said, standing up and placing a hand on my shoulder. "But you need to find a way to move forward, to process what happened without letting it consume you." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Deep down, I knew he was right. But how could I move on when the memory of that night was still so vivid, so terrifying? As if on cue, a distant howl echoed through the night. It wasn't the creature. Logically, I knew that. Probably just a dog or a coyote in the nearby park. But it was enough to send a shudder through my body, to bring all the fear and panic rushing back. Mike must have felt me tense up. "Steve, what is it?" I shook my head, trying to calm my racing heart. Nothing. Just remembering. He squeezed my shoulder gently. Why don't you come stay with Sarah and me for a few days? Get out of this apartment, get some real rest. The offer was tempting. The thought of not being alone, of having someone nearby if the nightmares came. But then I thought of potentially putting Mike and his wife in danger. What if the creature somehow tracked me down? What if it hurt them because of me? Thanks, I said, forcing a smile. But I think I need to work through this on my own. Mike nodded, though I could see he wasn't happy about it. All right, but promise me you'll call if you need anything. Day or night, okay? I promise, I said, walking him to the door. As I closed the door behind him, the silence of the apartment seemed to press in on me. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood, fighting back tears of frustration and fear. I knew I couldn't go on like this. The lack of sleep, the constant paranoia, it was slowly destroying me. But how could I move on when I knew the truth? When I knew that somewhere out there, a monster roamed free, and no one believed me. I made my way back to the bedroom, my eyes drawn to the scars visible in the mirror. They would fade in time, the doctors had said. But I knew the real scars, the ones that ran far deeper, might never heal. As I lay down on the bed, not even bothering to change out of my clothes, I steeled myself for another long night of staring at the ceiling, jumping at every sound. The monster might not be able to reach me here in my apartment, but in my mind, in my memories, it was always there, waiting. I closed my eyes, knowing that sleep would likely elude me once again, but as I drifted in that hazy space between wakefulness and slumber, I could have sworn I heard a low, rumbling growl. My eyes snapped open, my heart pounding. The room was empty, silent, but as I lay there, trembling and wide awake, I knew with grim certainty that this haunting was far from over. The creature might be gone, vanished into the vastness of the forest, but its shadow would loom over me for a long, long time to come. The morning sun struggled to pierce through the dense canopy as I stepped onto the trailhead of the Tillamook State Forest. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, a smell I usually found comforting. But today, something felt off. I adjusted my backpack, its weight a reminder of the solo 3-day hike ahead of me. You sure about this, Emma? My friend Sarah had asked when I told her about my plans. Going alone isn't the smartest idea. I'd brushed off her concerns with a laugh. I'll be fine. It's just a few days in the woods. What's the worst that could happen? Those words echoed in my mind now, mocking me as I took my first steps into the forest. The trail stretched before me, disappearing into a green tunnel of ferns and towering Douglas firs. I pulled out my map, double-checking my route. The Wilson River Trail would take me deep into the heart of the forest, far from the usual tourist spots. As I hiked, the forest seemed to swallow me whole. The sounds of civilization faded away, replaced by the crunch of leaves under my boots and the occasional call of a bird. But there was something else, too. A stillness that felt unnatural, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I shook off the feeling, chalking it up to first-day jitters. Get it together, Emma, I muttered to myself. You've done this a dozen times before. But as the hours passed, that nagging sense of unease refused to leave. The silence grew more oppressive, broken only by the sound of my own labored breathing as I climbed a particularly steep section of the trail. When I reached the top, I paused to catch my breath and take in the view. Miles of unbroken forest stretched in every direction, a sea of green under the cloudy Oregon sky. It was beautiful, but something about the vastness made me feel small and vulnerable. I reached for my water bottle, only to find it nearly empty. Crap, I sighed, glancing at my watch. It was later than I'd realized. I needed to find a good spot to set up camp soon. As I continued down the trail, the shadows began to lengthen. The forest took on a different character in the fading light, familiar shapes transforming into looming, menacing silhouettes. Every rustle in the underbrush made me jump, my imagination conjuring images of bears or mountain lions lurking just out of sight. "It's nothing," I told myself firmly. "Just deer or squirrels." But then I heard it, a snap of a twig behind me, too loud to be a small animal. I whirled around, my heart pounding. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small and frightened in the gathering darkness. "Is someone there?" Only silence answered me. I stood frozen for a long moment, straining my ears for any sound. Nothing, just the wind in the trees and my own rapid breathing. "You're being ridiculous," I scolded myself, turning back to the trail. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My pace quickened, eyes darting from side to side as I searched for a suitable campsite. Finally, I spotted a small clearing just off the trail. It wasn't ideal, too exposed for my liking, but with night falling fast, I didn't have much choice. I quickly set up my tent, my hands shaking slightly as I fumbled with the poles. As I worked, I couldn't stop glancing over my shoulder at the darkening forest. The trees seemed to press in closer, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. I shivered, zipping up my jacket against the chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. With the tent up, I forced myself to go through the motions of making camp. I gathered firewood, my nerves jangling at every sound. The snapping of the twigs in my hands made me flinch, reminding me of that noise on the trail. "Stop it," I muttered. "You're letting your imagination run wild." But as I knelt to start the fire, a gust of wind carried a scent that made me freeze. It was a musky animal smell, but unlike anything I'd encountered before. Not bear or deer or any other forest creature I knew. This was different. Wrong, somehow. I scrambled to my feet, spinning in a circle as I peered into the gathering darkness. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just that eerie, watching stillness. "Hello?" I called again, hating how my voice shook. "Is anyone out there?" The silence stretched on, broken only by the pounding of my heart. Then from somewhere in the depths of the forest came a sound that turned my blood to ice. A low rumbling growl, too deep to be a bear, too guttural to be human. I stumbled backward, nearly falling into my half-built fire pit. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. It had to be a bear, right? Or maybe a cougar. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. This was something else entirely. With trembling hands, I grabbed my flashlight from my pack and swept its beam across the tree line. Shadows danced and shifted, playing tricks on my eyes. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought I saw something massive move between two distant trees. But when I blinked, it was gone. "It's nothing," I whispered, trying to convince myself. "There's nothing out there." But as the words left my mouth, I knew they were a lie. There was something out there in the darkness. Something that shouldn't exist, and it was watching me. I retreated to my tent, zipping the flimsy nylon door as if it could protect me from whatever was lurking in the forest. Inside, I huddled in my sleeping bag, jumping at every sound. Sleep was impossible. I lay awake, straining my ears for any sign of approach, any hint of that terrifying growl. As the night wore on, exhaustion began to overtake fear. My eyelids grew heavy, and I found myself drifting off despite my terror. Just before sleep claimed me, a final thought flitted through my mind. I should never have come here alone. Little did I know, as I finally succumbed to an uneasy sleep, that this was only the beginning. The true horror, the encounter that would change my life forever, was still to come. I awoke with a start, my heart pounding. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was. Then it all came flooding back. The hike, the eerie silence, that terrifying growl in the night. I fumbled for my phone, squinting at the bright screen. 5:47 a.m. The pale light of dawn was just beginning to filter through the tent fabric. I lay there listening. The forest was alive with morning sounds, birds chirping, small animals rustling in the underbrush. It all seemed so normal, so different from the oppressive silence of the night before. Had I imagined it all? Get a grip, Emma, I muttered to myself. It was just your imagination playing tricks on you. But as I unzipped the tent and stepped out into the crisp morning air, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that clung to me like a second skin. The clearing looked peaceful enough in the early light, but the surrounding forest seemed to loom ominously, hiding untold secrets in its depths. I went about my morning routine mechanically, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. As I packed up my campsite, I kept glancing over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and uncertain. "Is anyone there?" Only the chirping of birds answered me. I shook my head, feeling foolish. "Pull yourself together," I scolded myself. "You're acting like a scared kid." But as I shouldered my backpack and set off down the trail, that nagging sense of wrongness persisted. The forest, which had always been a place of solace for me, now felt alien and threatening. Every shadow seemed to hide potential danger. Every rustle in the undergrowth made me flinch. I hiked for hours, pushing myself harder than I normally would, driven by an inexplicable urge to put as much distance as possible between myself and last night's campsite. The trail grew steeper, winding its way up into the hills. My legs burned with the effort, and sweat trickled down my back despite the cool air. As I paused to catch my breath and take a swig from my water bottle, I heard it. A sound that made my blood run cold. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, coming from somewhere off the trail to my left. I froze, my water bottle halfway to my lips. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Is someone there?" The footsteps stopped abruptly. The forest fell silent, that same unnatural quiet from the night before descending like a heavy blanket. I stood there, hardly daring to breathe, straining my ears for any sound. Then I saw it. Movement among the trees, just at the edge of my vision. Something massive, far too big to be a person, moving with a fluid grace that belied its size. I caught a glimpse of dark fur, a flash of eyes that seemed to glow with an inner light. "Oh God," I whispered, stumbling backward. My foot caught on a root and I went down hard, my backpack cushioning my fall. I scrambled to my feet, my eyes never leaving the spot where I'd seen the creature. But it was gone. The forest was still once more, giving no hint of the monster that had been there moments before. Had I imagined it? Was my mind playing tricks on me? A twig snapped behind me and I whirled around, my heart in my throat. There was nothing there, just the empty trail stretching out before and behind me. But then the wind shifted, and a scent hit me that nearly made me gag. It was that same musky animal smell from the night before, but stronger now. Closer. Panic seized me. I turned and ran, all thoughts of following the trail forgotten in my desperation to get away. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. Behind me I could hear something giving chase. Something big. The sound of my pursuer spurred me on, lending speed to my tired legs. I ran blindly with no thought but escape. My lungs burned and my vision blurred with tears of terror, but still I ran. I don't know how long I fled. It could have been minutes or hours. Time lost all meaning in the face of that primal fear. Eventually, I burst out of the trees into a small clearing, my legs finally giving out. I collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, my whole body shaking. As I lay there trying to catch my breath, I realized the sounds of pursuit had stopped. Slowly, cautiously, I raised my head and looked around. The clearing was empty, ringed by dense forest on all sides. There was no sign of the creature that had chased me. I struggled to my feet, wincing at the various scrapes and bruises I'd acquired during my headlong flight. My backpack was gone, lost somewhere in the forest. With it went my map, most of my supplies, and any hope of finding my way back to the trail. "Hello?" I called out weakly, more out of habit than any real hope of response. "Is anyone there? I need help." Only the whisper of wind through the trees answered me. I was alone. lost in the vastness of the Tillamook forest, with night approaching and an unknown predator on the loose. I sank to the ground, overwhelmed by the hopelessness of my situation. Tears streamed down my face as the reality of my predicament hit me. "What am I going to do?" I sobbed, burying my face in my hands. As if in answer, a low, rumbling growl echoed through the clearing. My head snapped up, eyes wide with terror. There, at the edge of the trees, stood a creature out of nightmare. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall, covered in thick, matted fur. Its face was a twisted parody of humanity, with deep-set eyes that gleamed with predatory intelligence. As I watched, frozen in horror, it took a step forward, its massive hands ending in wickedly curved claws. This was no bear, no known predator. This was something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist. Bigfoot. The creature's lips pulled back in a snarl, revealing yellowed fangs. It took another step forward, and I knew with terrifying certainty that I was about to die. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the clearing, I scrambled backward, searching desperately for any means of escape or defense. But I knew deep in my heart that there was no escaping this monster. The attack I had feared since that first night was about to begin, and I was utterly unprepared for the horror that was about to unfold. The last rays of sunlight were fading from the sky as I stood there, frozen in terror, facing the monstrous creature that had haunted my nightmares. Bigfoot. The name seemed absurd in the face of the very real, very dangerous beast before me. Its eyes, glowing with an otherworldly light in the gathering darkness, were fixed on me with predatory intent. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything, but my body refused to respond. Fear had turned my muscles to stone, leaving me rooted to the spot as the creature took another lumbering step forward. The stench of wet fur and rotting meat filled my nostrils, making me gag. "Please," I whimpered, finding my voice at last. "Please don't." But there was no humanity in those eyes, no hint of understanding or mercy. Only hunger and rage. The beast let out a bone-chilling roar that shook the very air around us, and I knew that my pleas were useless. This wasn't a misunderstood creature of legend, this was a monster, pure and simple. As if my terrified whisper had broken some spell, my body finally responded to my desperate need to flee. I spun on my heel and ran, crashing through the underbrush with no thought of direction or destination. All that mattered was putting distance between myself and that nightmarish creature. Behind me, I could hear the sound of pursuit. Trees creaked and snapped as Bigfoot barreled through them, its massive bulk giving it an advantage in the dense forest. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out everything but the sound of my own ragged breathing and the creature's enraged bellows. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost all meaning in the face of that primal terror. But eventually, inevitably, my foot caught on an exposed root and I went down hard. Pain exploded in my ankle as I tumbled to the forest floor, leaves and twigs scratching at my face and arms. Gasping for air, I tried to scramble to my feet, but my injured ankle gave way beneath me. I fell back to the ground, a sob of despair escaping my lips. This was it. This was how I was going to die. The sound of heavy footsteps approached, slow and deliberate now. The creature knew I was trapped, injured. It was savoring the moment like a cat toying with a mouse before the kill. I rolled onto my back, leaves sticking to my tear-streaked face, and saw it looming over me. In the darkness, it seemed even larger, its silhouette blotting out what little starlight filtered through the canopy. The stench of its breath washed over me as it leaned down, studying me with those terrifyingly intelligent eyes. "No," I whispered, raising my arms in a futile attempt to protect myself. "Please, God, no." The creature's massive hand shot out, faster than I would have believed possible for something so large. Its fingers closed around my arm, claws digging into my flesh, and I screamed. The sound echoed through the forest, startling a flock of birds into flight. With horrifying strength, Bigfoot lifted me off the ground as if I weighed nothing. I dangled there, feet kicking uselessly in the air, staring into its nightmarish face. Its breath was hot on my skin, reeking of decay and old blood. I could see my own terrified reflection in its eyes, wide and white with fear. "Let me go!" I screamed, thrashing in its grip. My free hand clawed at its arm, but it was like trying to scratch stone. My nails broke, leaving bloody trails on my own skin, but not even marking its matted fur. The creature seemed to grow tired of my struggles. With a grunt that might have been annoyance, it shook me violently. My head snapped back, and for a moment stars exploded behind my eyes. When my vision cleared, I saw the forest floor rushing up to meet me. The impact drove the air from my lungs. I lay there, gasping like a fish out of water, pain radiating through every part of my body. But I knew I couldn't stay down. With a Herculean effort, I rolled onto my stomach and began to crawl. I made it perhaps 3 feet before a massive foot came down on my back, pinning me to the ground. The weight was crushing, driving twigs and stones into my flesh. I could feel my ribs creaking under the pressure, threatening to snap at any moment. "Please," I sobbed, my voice muffled by the forest floor. "Someone help me." But there was no one to hear my cries, no one but the monster that now had me at its mercy. The foot lifted, and for a brief, hopeful moment I thought it might be over. Then claws raked across my back, shredding my jacket and the skin beneath. The pain was indescribable. I screamed until my throat was raw, my fingers digging into the earth as I tried to crawl away from the agony. But there was no escape. The creature grabbed me again, this time by the leg, and dragged me across the forest floor. Rocks and branches tore at my skin, adding to the constellation of cuts and bruises that already covered my body. We burst into another small clearing, moonlight illuminating the scene like some twisted stage. The creature lifted me again, holding me at eye level. Its face was inches from mine, hot breath washing over me. I could see every detail of its inhuman features: the jutting brow, the wide, flat nose, the yellowed fangs protruding from its lips. In that moment, staring into the eyes of this impossible creature, I knew that everything I had believed about the world was wrong. There were monsters in the dark, terrors beyond human understanding, and I was about to die at the hands of one of them. The creature opened its mouth wide, that bone-chilling roar filling the air once more. I closed my eyes, bracing for the end. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt myself flying through the air. The creature had thrown me, discarding me like a broken toy. I hit the ground hard, rolling several times before coming to a stop against the base of a tree. Every part of me hurt. I could taste blood in my mouth, feel it trickling from a dozen wounds. But somehow, miraculously, I was still alive. I forced my eyes open, expecting to see the creature looming over me for the final blow. But the clearing was empty. Bigfoot had vanished as quickly and silently as it had appeared, leaving no trace of its presence save for the broken, battered girl lying on the forest floor. As the adrenaline began to fade, the full extent of my injuries made themselves known. My ankle throbbed, likely sprained if not broken. My back felt like it was on fire, where the creature's claws had raked across it. Every breath sent daggers of pain through my ribs, but I was alive. Somehow, against all odds, I had survived an encounter with a monster straight out of legend. As I lay there, struggling to remain conscious, I knew that my ordeal was far from over. I was alone, injured, and lost in a forest that now held terrors beyond imagination. And somewhere out there, hidden in the darkness, Bigfoot was waiting. The fight for survival had only just begun. I don't know how long I lay there at the base of that tree, drifting in and out of consciousness. The pain from my injuries throbbed in time with my racing heartbeat, a constant reminder of the nightmare I was living. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent a fresh wave of terror through me. Was it coming back to finish what it had started? As the first pale light of dawn began to filter through the trees, I knew I couldn't stay here. I had to move, had to find help, or I was going to die in this forest. With a groan of pain, I pushed myself up to a sitting position, leaning heavily against the tree trunk. "Okay, Emma," I whispered to myself, my voice hoarse from screaming. "You can do this, one step at a time." I took stock of my injuries as best I could in the dim light. My ankle was swollen and tender, definitely sprained if not broken. The cuts on my back burned fiercely, and I could feel dried blood caked on my skin and clothes. Every breath sent a stab of pain through my ribs. But I was alive, and that was something, and that was... Using the tree for support, I slowly, painfully pulled myself to my feet. The world spun alarmingly, and for a moment I thought I might pass out again, but I gritted my teeth and held on, waiting for the dizziness to pass. "Help!" I called out, my voice weak and trembling. "Is anyone out there? Please, I need help." Only the chirping of early morning birds answered me. I was on my own. With no idea which direction would lead me back to civilization, I picked a direction at random and started limping. Each step was agony, but the alternative, staying put and waiting for that monster to return, was unthinkable. I hadn't gone far when I heard it, the sound of running water. A stream or river could lead me back to people, or at least provide me with much-needed water. I altered my course, following the sound. As I stumbled through the underbrush, my mind raced. What was that thing? How could Bigfoot, a creature I'd always dismissed as myth and legend, be real? And why had it attacked me? The questions swirled in my head, but I had no answers, only the vivid, terrifying memory of those inhuman eyes and wickedly sharp claws. I was so lost in my thoughts that I almost missed the sound, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate the very air around me. I froze, my blood turning to ice in my veins. It was back. Slowly, painfully, I turned around. There it stood, just yards away, its massive form blending eerily well with the surrounding trees. How long had it been following me? How had something so large moved so silently? For a long moment we stared at each other. I could see intelligence in those eyes, a cold, alien intelligence that sent shivers down my spine. This wasn't just some animal acting on instinct. There was purpose behind its actions, a malevolence that was all too human. "Please," I whispered, though I knew it was futile. "Please, just let me go." The creature's lips pulled back in a snarl, revealing those yellowed fangs. Then, with a roar that shook the leaves from the trees, it charged. Adrenaline surged through me, momentarily dulling the pain of my injuries. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush with no thought but escape. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me, but somehow I kept my feet. I could hear it behind me, gaining ground with every second. Its footsteps shook the earth. Its roars filled the air. I knew I couldn't outrun it. Not in my condition, not even if I were at my best. But giving up wasn't an option. The sound of rushing water grew louder. Suddenly the trees opened up, revealing a fast-moving river. The bank dropped off sharply, the water churning white several feet below. I skidded to a stop at the edge, nearly losing my balance. For a split second, I hesitated. The water looked dangerous, full of hidden rocks and swift currents. But the sound of the creature crashing through the trees behind me made the decision for me. I took a deep breath and jumped. The shock of the cold water drove the air from my lungs. The current immediately caught me, spinning me around and dragging me under. I fought my way back to the surface, gasping for air. Through water-blurred eyes, I saw the creature standing on the bank, roaring its frustration. But I had no time to feel relief. The river was carrying me swiftly downstream, tossing me about like a rag doll. I struggled to keep my head above water, fighting against the current and the pain of my injuries. I don't know how long I was in the water. Time lost all meaning as I fought for survival, bouncing off rocks, swallowing mouthfuls of river water. Just when I thought I couldn't hold on any longer, my feet scraped bottom. With the last of my strength, I dragged myself onto a gravelly bank, collapsing on the shore. For several minutes, I just lay there, coughing up water and gulping in air. Every part of me hurt, but I was alive. Somehow, against all odds, I was still alive. When I finally found the strength to lift my head, I saw that the river had carried me far from where I jumped in. There was no sign of the creature on either bank. Had I lost it? Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself to my feet. My clothes were soaked and torn, my body a mass of cuts and bruises. But the river had washed away most of the blood, and the cold water had numbed some of the pain. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely more than a croak. "Is anyone there? I need help." To my shock and relief, I heard a response. "Hello? Is someone there?" The voice was distant but unmistakably human. Tears of relief sprang to my eyes as I stumbled towards the sound. "Here. I'm over here. Please help me." As I rounded a bend in the river, I saw them, a group of hikers, staring at me in shock. Their expressions of concern quickly turned to alarm as they took in my battered appearance. "Oh my God," one of them said, rushing towards me. "What happened to you?" I opened my mouth to explain, but the words wouldn't come. How could I possibly describe what I'd been through? Who would believe me? As the adrenaline faded and the reality of my rescue set in, my legs gave out. The last thing I remember is strong arms catching me as I fell and a voice saying, "It's okay. You're safe now." But even as consciousness slipped away, I knew that wasn't true. I had survived, yes. But safe? As long as that creature was out there, as long as the memory of those terrifying eyes haunted me, I would never feel safe again. I drifted in and out of consciousness, vaguely aware of voices around me and the sensation of movement. When I finally came to, I found myself in the back of an SUV, wrapped in emergency blankets. A woman with kind eyes was sitting next to me, holding my hand. "You're awake?" she said softly. "How are you feeling?" I tried to speak, but my throat was raw from screaming and swallowing river water. All that came out was a hoarse croak. "It's okay, don't try to talk," the woman soothed. "I'm Sarah. We're taking you to the hospital in Tillamook. You're safe now." Safe. The word echoed in my mind, bringing with it a flood of memories. The attack, the chase, the terrifying creature with its inhuman eyes. I shuddered, causing a fresh wave of pain to wash over me. "Water?" I managed to whisper. Sarah held a water bottle to my lips, letting me take small sips. As the cool liquid soothed my throat, I became more aware of my surroundings. We were driving down a winding forest road, trees flashing by outside the windows. 2 men were in the front seats, talking in low voices. "Never seen anything like it," one was saying. "She looks like she went 10 rounds with a bear." "Bears don't usually attack like that," the other replied. "Mountain lion, maybe?" I wanted to tell them they were wrong, that what attacked me was something far worse than any bear or mountain lion. But exhaustion was pulling me back under, and I slipped into a fitful sleep before I could find the words. The next time I awoke, we were pulling into the emergency bay of a hospital. Everything became a blur of activity. Nurses, doctors, questions I couldn't answer. They cut away what was left of my clothes, cataloging my injuries with clinical detachment. Multiple lacerations, possible broken ribs, sprained ankle. I tried to focus to tell them what had happened, but the words wouldn't come. How could I explain the impossible? Who would believe me? They gave me something for the pain, and the world grew fuzzy around the edges. As I drifted off again, I heard a doctor say, "She's lucky to be alive." Lucky. If only they knew. I don't know how long I was out, but when I opened my eyes again, I was in a hospital room. The pain had dulled to a persistent ache, and my thoughts were clearer. Sunlight was streaming through the window, telling me at least a day had passed since my rescue. A nurse came in, smiling when she saw I was awake. "Good morning, Emma. How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck," I croaked, my voice still rough. She chuckled sympathetically. "I bet. You've been through quite an ordeal. The doctor will be in soon to check on you, and there are some police officers who'd like to ask you a few questions if you're up for it." I nodded, though my stomach clenched at the thought. What was I going to tell them? The doctor came first, a middle-aged man with a kind face and tired eyes. He checked my vitals and looked over my injuries, his expression growing more puzzled as he did. "These lacerations," he said, gesturing to the bandages on my back. "They're unusual, not like any animal attack I've seen before." I swallowed hard. "It wasn't an animal," I said softly. "At least not any animal you know." He looked at me sharply. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath. It was Bigfoot." The moment the words left my mouth, I regretted them. The doctor's expression shifted from concern to skepticism. "Emma," he said gently, "you've been through a traumatic experience. It's not uncommon for the mind to create explanations." "I'm not crazy," I interrupted, my voice rising. "I know what I saw. What attacked me wasn't a bear or a mountain lion. It was huge, it walked on two legs, it had almost human eyes." The doctor patted my hand, his voice taking on a patronizing tone. "You've suffered a concussion along with your other injuries. Confusion and unusual thoughts are normal. Let's focus on your physical recovery for now, okay?" I wanted to argue, to make him understand, but I could see it was useless. He didn't believe me. No one would. The police came next. 2 officers who looked more at home in the woods than in the sterile hospital room. They asked me to recount what had happened, their pens poised over their notepads. I told them about getting lost, about being chased and attacked. But when I got to the part about Bigfoot, I hesitated. The memory of the doctor's disbelief was still fresh. "It was big," I said finally. "Covered in fur. I didn't get a good look at it." The officers exchanged glances. "Sounds like it could have been a bear," one said. "They've been known to attack humans, especially if surprised, or if it's a mother with cubs." I wanted to scream that they were wrong, that what attacked me was no bear, but I bit my tongue. What was the point? They'd just think I was crazy or in shock. "Yeah," I said instead, my voice hollow. "Maybe it was a bear." They asked a few more questions, but I could tell they'd already made up their minds about what had happened. Just another hiker who got in over her head, attacked by local wildlife. Nothing more to see here. After they left, I lay back in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling. The weight of what had happened, of what I'd seen, pressed down on me like a physical thing. I was alive, yes, but at what cost? I'd encountered something that shouldn't exist, something that had nearly killed me. And now, no one believed me. As the day wore on, nurses came and went. My parents called, frantic with worry, promising they were on their way. Friends sent messages, asking what had happened. To all of them, I gave the same vague answers. I got lost. I was attacked. I don't remember much, but in the quiet moments between visitors, when the hospital sounds faded into the background, I couldn't escape the memories. The creature's roar echoing through the forest, the glint of its claws in the moonlight, those terrifyingly intelligent eyes filled with malice. I knew then that even though I'd escaped, even though I was supposedly safe in this sterile hospital room, my ordeal was far from over. The creature was still out there, hidden in the vastness of the Tillamook forest, and I was the only one who knew the truth. As night fell and the hospital quieted, I lay awake, every shadow making me flinch, every sound setting my heart racing. I'd survived the attack, but I realized with growing dread that the real battle was just beginning. The battle to make people believe, to warn them of the danger lurking in the woods. And underneath it all, a gnawing fear that wouldn't let go. What if it came looking for me again? The morning light filtering through the hospital window did little to ease my anxiety. I'd barely slept, haunted by nightmares of glowing eyes and reaching claws. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that forest, running for my life. A gentle knock on the door startled me out of my thoughts. My parents entered, their faces etched with worry and relief. "Emma, sweetheart," my mom said, rushing to my bedside. "We were so worried. How are you feeling?" I tried to smile, but it felt forced. "I'm okay, Mom. Just sore." My dad stood at the foot of the bed, his eyes taking in my bandages and bruises. "What happened out there, Emma? The police said something about an animal attack?" I hesitated, the memory of the doctors and officers' disbelief still fresh in my mind. But these were my parents. If anyone would believe me, it would be them, right? It wasn't an animal, I said softly. At least not any animal we know. It was Bigfoot. The silence that followed was deafening. My parents exchanged a look I couldn't quite decipher. "Honey," my mom said gently, "you've been through a traumatic experience. It's normal for your mind to—" "I'm not making this up," I interrupted, my voice rising. "I know what I saw. It was huge, covered in fur, walking on 2 legs. It chased me, attacked me. I barely got away." My dad sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Emma, Bigfoot isn't real. It was probably a bear, or maybe a mountain lion. The doctor said you have a concussion. Your memory of what happened might be a bit confused." I felt tears of frustration welling up in my eyes. "I'm not confused. I'm not crazy. Why won't anyone believe me?" My mom took my hand, her voice soothing. "We believe that you believe it, sweetie. But you have to admit, it sounds unlikely." I pulled my hand away, anger and hurt bubbling up inside me. "Fine. You don't believe me either. Just leave me alone." They tried to comfort me, to apologize, but I turned away, pretending to sleep until they finally left. As soon as the door closed behind them, I let the tears fall. The rest of the day passed in a blur of doctors, nurses, and well-meaning visitors. To all of them, I gave the same vague story about getting lost and being attacked by something big. I couldn't bear to see the doubt and pity in their eyes if I told them the truth. As evening approached, the doctor came in for a final check. "Well, Emma," he said, reviewing my chart, "you're healing nicely. I think we can discharge you tomorrow morning, but you'll need to take it easy for a while. Those injuries will take time to fully heal." I nodded absently, my mind elsewhere. The thought of leaving the hospital, of going back to the real world, filled me with dread. How could I go back to normal life knowing what was out there? "Emma," the doctor said, his voice gentler now, "I know you've been through a lot. It's normal to feel overwhelmed. If you'd like, I can refer you to a therapist who specializes in trauma." I almost laughed. A therapist? As if talking about my feelings would make the memory of that creature's roar any less real. "No, thanks," I said flatly. "I'll be fine." He didn't look convinced, but didn't push the issue. After he left, I sat in silence, watching the sun set outside my window. Somewhere out there, beyond the city lights, was the forest. And in that forest, I shuddered, pushing the thought away. I had to get out of here, had to do something. But what? Who would believe me? An idea began to form in my mind. If no one would believe my words, maybe they'd believe evidence. I reached for my phone, wincing at the pain the movement caused, and started searching. Local news sites, cryptozoology forums, even social media, anywhere I might find reports of similar sightings or attacks. Most of what I found was clearly fake or explainable, but a few accounts caught my eye. Hikers reporting strange noises in the Tillamook forest. Campers who'd fled in the night, spooked by something they couldn't explain. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I was so engrossed in my research that I didn't notice the nurse enter until she spoke. "Lights out soon, Emma. You should try to get some rest." I looked up, startled to see how late it had gotten. "Oh, right, thanks." She frowned slightly, noticing my phone. "Everything okay? You look intense." I forced a smile. "Just catching up on what I missed while I was away." She didn't look entirely convinced, but didn't press the issue. After she left, I reluctantly set my phone aside and tried to sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that clearing, staring into those inhuman eyes. The memory was so vivid I could almost smell the creature's rank breath. Unable to stand it any longer, I got out of bed, gritting my teeth against the pain. I limped to the window, looking out at the city below. Cars moved along the streets, People went about their lives, all blissfully unaware of the danger lurking just beyond the city limits. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, my breath fogging the window. "I know you're out there," I whispered, "and I'm going to prove it." As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, I made a decision. I couldn't go back to my old life, couldn't pretend this never happened. Once I got out of here, I would find proof I would make them believe. But even as I made this resolution, a chill ran down my spine. What if, in trying to expose the truth, I drew the creature's attention again? What if it came looking for me? I shook my head, trying to dispel the fear. It didn't matter. I couldn't live in fear, couldn't let this experience define me. I had survived once. If I had to, I would do it again. As the sun rose, casting long shadows across my hospital room, I began to plan. Tomorrow, I would leave this place, would start my journey back to a normal life. But it wouldn't be the same life I'd left behind when I entered that forest, because now I knew the truth, and I was determined to make others see it too, no matter the cost. The morning of my discharge from the hospital arrived with a mix of relief and apprehension. As I slowly dressed in the clothes my parents had brought, every movement a reminder of my ordeal, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to step back into a world that no longer made sense. "Ready to go home, sweetie?" my mom asked, her voice overly cheerful as she helped me gather my things. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Home. The word felt hollow now. How could I go back to normal life after what I'd experienced? The drive from the hospital was quiet, the silence broken only by my parents' occasional attempts at small talk. I stared out the window, watching the city give way to suburbs, then to the rolling hills that bordered the Tillamook forest, somewhere out there, hidden in those trees. "Emma?" My dad's voice snapped me back to reality. "We're home." Our house looked exactly as I'd left it, but it felt different. Foreign, as if I were seeing it through someone else's eyes. I limped inside, leaning heavily on my dad for support. "Why don't you rest on the couch?" my mom suggested. "I'll make you some tea." I sank into the familiar cushions, wincing as my bruised body protested. The TV was on, tuned to a local news channel. I was about to ask for the remote when a familiar face appeared on the screen. In local news, a hiker was rescued from Tillamook State Forest after what authorities are calling a wildlife encounter. Emma Parker, 25, was found injured by a group of hikers after apparently being attacked by an animal, possibly a bear. I sat up straighter, ignoring the pain. "That's not what happened," I said, my voice rising. "Why are they saying that?" My parents exchanged a look I was beginning to hate. "Honey," my dad said gently, "that is what happened. You were attacked by an animal. It's okay if you don't remember all the details." "I remember everything," I snapped. "It wasn't a bear. It was Bigfoot. Why won't anyone believe me?" The silence that followed was deafening. My mom set down the tea she'd brought, her hands shaking slightly. "Emma, we're worried about you. Maybe we should consider talking to someone, a professional." I laughed bitterly. "A shrink, you mean? Because you think I'm crazy." "No one thinks you're crazy," my dad said, but his tone lacked conviction. "You've been through a traumatic experience. It's normal to be confused." "I'm not confused," I shouted, struggling to my feet. "I know what I saw. Why won't you believe me?" I stormed out of the room as best I could with my injuries, slamming the door to my bedroom behind me. Tears of frustration burned in my eyes as I collapsed onto my bed. Hours passed. My parents knocked occasionally, offering food or company, but I ignored them. As night fell, I found myself drawn to the window, staring out at the distant tree line barely visible in the fading light. A soft knock at the door broke my reverie. "Emma?" It was Sarah, my best friend. "Can I come in?" I hesitated, then sighed. "Yeah, it's open." Sarah entered cautiously, her eyes widening as she took in my battered appearance. "Oh, Emma," she breathed. "I'm so glad you're okay. When I heard what happened—" "What did you hear?" I asked sharply. She blinked, taken aback by my tone. "That you were attacked by a bear or something while hiking." "Emma, what really happened out there?" For a moment I considered telling her the truth, but the memory of everyone's disbelief stopped me. I don't want to talk about it," I said finally. Sarah sat beside me on the bed, her face full of concern. "That's okay. You don't have to. I'm just glad you're safe now." Safe. There was that word again. I wanted to laugh. How could I feel safe knowing what was out there? "The police officer I talked to said you were pretty out of it when they found you," Sarah continued. "He said you were saying some pretty wild stuff. About Bigfoot?" I tensed, waiting for the ridicule, the disbelief. But Sarah just looked at me, her expression open and curious. "Sarah," I said slowly, "if I tell you something crazy, will you promise to listen? To really listen?" She nodded, her eyes serious. "Of course. You can tell me anything." So I told her. Everything. The chase through the forest, the terrifying encounter, the creature's inhuman strength and intelligence. As I spoke, the memories came flooding back, so vivid I could almost smell the rank odor of the beast's breath. When I finished, Sarah was silent for a long moment. "Emma," she said finally, I don't know what to say." "You don't believe me," I said flatly. "It's not that," she said quickly. It's a lot to take in. Are you sure it wasn't just a bear, in the dark with all that adrenaline?" I stood up abruptly, ignoring the pain that shot through my body. "I knew it. You're just like everyone else. You think I'm crazy or lying or I don't know what." "Emma, no," Sarah protested, reaching for me. "I'm just trying to understand." But I was done trying to make people understand. "I think you should go," I said coldly. Sarah looked hurt, but she nodded. "Okay, but Emma, I'm here if you need me, no matter what." After she left, I sank back onto my bed, feeling more alone than ever. The room felt too small, too confining. I needed air. Ignoring the protest of my injuries, I snuck out of the house and into the backyard. The night was clear, stars twinkling overhead, but my eyes were drawn to the dark mass of the forest on the horizon. As I stared into the distance, a chill ran down my spine. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw something move among the trees. Something large. I blinked, and it was gone. Just a trick of the light, I told myself, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As I hurried back inside, locking the door behind me, I knew sleep would be impossible tonight. Because now, the monster wasn't just in my memories. It was out there, somewhere in the darkness, and I was the only one who knew the truth. The next morning, I woke with a sense of determination that overshadowed my physical pain. If no one would believe my words, I'd have to find proof. I dressed carefully, wincing as the fabric brushed against my healing wounds, and made my way downstairs. My parents were in the kitchen, their hushed conversation stopping abruptly as I entered. The silence was heavy with unspoken concerns. "I want to go back," I announced, my voice steadier than I felt. My mom's coffee mug clattered against the counter. "Go back? Emma, you can't be serious." "Not alone," I clarified quickly, seeing the panic in their eyes. "I want to go with the researchers, the ones who investigate unusual sightings." My dad's brow furrowed. "You mean those cryptozoology folks?" "Emma, they're not real scientists. They chase myths and legends, not facts." "They're the only ones who might believe me," I insisted. "Please, I need to do this. I need to show you I'm not crazy." My parents exchanged that look again, the one that said they were worried about my mental state. But something in my expression must have convinced them. "All right," my dad sighed, "but we're coming with you. And at the first sign of danger, we're leaving. Deal?" I nodded, relief washing over me. Deal. A few hours and several phone calls later, we were in my dad's SUV, heading back towards Tillamook State Forest. Dr. Alan Reeves, a cryptozoologist from Portland State University, sat in the passenger seat, his excitement palpable. "This is fascinating, truly fascinating," he said for the 10th time, reviewing my statement. "If what you saw is real, it could change everything we know about cryptid behavior." I caught my mom's eye in the rearview mirror. Her skepticism was clear, but she remained silent. As we neared the forest, my heart began to race. Memories of that night flooded back. The terror, the pain, the overwhelming sense of helplessness. I closed my eyes, taking deep breaths to calm myself. "We're here," my dad announced, pulling into a small parking area. The forest loomed before us, dark and foreboding. "Doctor," Reeves practically bounced out of the car, his equipment clanking. "Now, Emma," he said, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "Can you lead us to where the encounter took place?" I hesitated. The thought of going back into those woods made my stomach churn. But I had to do this. I had to prove I wasn't crazy. I think so," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "It was near Wilson River. I remember that." We set off down the trail, Dr. Reeves chattering excitedly about track patterns and habitat ranges. My parents flanked me protectively, their eyes scanning the trees for any sign of danger. As we walked, the forest seemed to close in around us. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig made me flinch. I kept expecting to see those glowing eyes peering at me from the shadows. "Here," I said suddenly, recognizing a clearing. "This is where it happened, where it attacked me." Dr. Reeves immediately went to work, examining the ground and surrounding vegetation. My parents stood awkwardly to the side, clearly uncomfortable. "Fascinating," Dr. Reeves muttered, crouching to examine something on the forest floor. "These tracks, they're unlike anything I've seen before. Too large for a bear, and the gait is all wrong." Hope surged within me. "So you believe me? You think it was really Bigfoot?" He straightened, his expression cautious. "I believe you saw something, Emma. These tracks are certainly unusual, but without more concrete evidence." My heart sank. Even here with a so-called expert, I wasn't being fully believed. "Look," I said desperately, pointing to a nearby tree. "There are claw marks there, and over here where it threw me, you can see where the ground is disturbed." Dr. Reeves examined each area I pointed out, his frown deepening. "The claw marks are intriguing, but they could be from a bear, and the disturbed ground, well, there are many explanations for that." "But you said the tracks were unusual," I protested. "Isn't that proof?" He sighed, looking at me with pity. "Unusual doesn't necessarily mean supernatural, Emma. These could be from a particularly large bear, or even human-made, without clearer evidence, hair samples, clear footprints, photographic proof. I can't definitively say this was a Bigfoot encounter." I felt the last shred of hope slip away. Even the people who wanted to believe wouldn't believe me. "I think that's enough for today," my dad said firmly, noticing my distress. "We should head back." As we made our way back to the car, the forest seemed to mock me. Every shadow held the memory of that terrifying night. But now, with no evidence to show for it, those memories felt more like a nightmare than reality. Back at the parking lot, Dr. Reeves shook my hand. "Thank you for sharing your experience, Emma. While I can't confirm what you saw, your account is valuable to our research." I nodded numbly, barely hearing his words. As we drove home, the silence in the car was deafening. "I'm sorry, honey," my mom said finally. "I know this wasn't what you hoped for." I stared out the window, watching the trees blur past. "You still don't believe me, do you?" The lack of response was answer enough. That night, as I lay in bed, the events of the day replayed in my mind. The hopeful start, the growing disappointment, the crushing realization that no one, not even those who wanted to believe, would accept my story without proof. But as I drifted off to sleep, a new determination took hold. I might not have convinced anyone today, but I knew what I saw. The creature was real, and it was still out there. And somehow, someday, I would find a way to prove it, even if it meant facing my nightmares all over again. The days following our fruitless expedition to the forest blurred together in a haze of frustration and isolation. My parents walked on eggshells around me, their concerned glances and hushed conversations grating on my already frayed nerves. The weight of disbelief hung heavy in our home, an unspoken tension that filled every silence. I spent most of my time in my room, obsessively scouring the internet for any information that might corroborate my experience. Local news sites, cryptozoology forums, even social media. Anything that might offer a shred of evidence that I wasn't alone in what I'd seen. A soft knock on my door interrupted my research. "Emma?" My mom's voice called. "There's someone here to see you." I sighed, closing my laptop. "I'm not really up for visitors, Mom." "It's Detective Ramirez," she persisted, "from the sheriff's department. He says he needs to follow up on your statement." My heart skipped a beat. Maybe this was my chance to make someone believe me. I quickly ran a brush through my hair and made my way downstairs. Detective Ramirez was a tall man with kind eyes that didn't quite match his stern expression. He stood as I entered the living room, offering a hand. "Miss Parker," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Thank you for speaking with me. I just have a few follow-up questions about your incident in the forest." I nodded, sitting across from him. My parents hovered nearby, their anxiety palpable. "Now," Ramirez began, flipping open a notebook. "In your initial statement, you mentioned being attacked by a large creature. Can you describe it again for me?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "It was huge," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "At least 8 feet tall, covered in dark fur. It walked on 2 legs, but it wasn't human. Its face..." I shuddered at the memory. Its face was almost human-like, but distorted. And its eyes, they were intelligent, malevolent. Ramirez's pen scratched across his notepad. His expression remained neutral, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. "And you're certain it wasn't a bear?" he asked. "In the dark, with the stress of the situation, it's possible that..." "It wasn't a bear," I interrupted, frustration bubbling up. "I know what I saw. It was Bigfoot." The moment the words left my mouth, I regretted them. Ramirez's eyebrows shot up, and I could practically feel my parents cringing behind me. "Bigfoot," Ramirez repeated slowly. "Miss Parker, I understand you've been through a traumatic experience, but you don't believe me," I finished bitterly. "Just like everyone else." Ramirez sighed, closing his notebook. "What I believe doesn't matter. What matters are the facts. And the fact is, there's no evidence to support the existence of Bigfoot. Your injuries are consistent with an animal attack, most likely a bear." "But..." I started to protest, but he held up a hand. "I'm not here to debate cryptozoology, Miss Parker. I'm here to close this case. Unless you have any other information that might be relevant to the investigation, I think we're done here." As Ramirez stood to leave, I felt the last shred of hope slip away. Even law enforcement, people trained to look at evidence objectively, wouldn't believe me. After he left, my parents tried to comfort me, but their words rang hollow. How could they understand? They hadn't seen what I'd seen, felt the terror I'd felt. "Maybe we should consider that therapist the doctor recommended," my dad suggested gently. "Just to help you process everything." I laughed bitterly. "Right, because I'm the one with the problem. I'm the one who needs to be fixed." "Emma, that's not what we meant," my mom started. But I was already halfway up the stairs, slamming my bedroom door behind me. As the days wore on, my isolation grew. Friends called and texted, but I ignored them. What was the point? They wouldn't believe me either. Sarah tried to visit once, but I refused to see her. The memory of her doubt, her attempt to rationalize what I'd seen, was still too raw. I became a local curiosity, the girl who claimed to have seen Bigfoot. I could feel the stares when I ventured out, hear the whispers behind my back. "There's that Parker girl," they'd say, "the one who went crazy in the woods." Even the internet, which I'd hoped would provide some validation, turned against me. My story had spread, twisted, and exaggerated, becoming a source of mockery on social media. Bigfoot girl, they called me, sharing memes and jokes at my expense. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself standing at my window, staring out at the distant tree line. The forest loomed dark and ominous, hiding its secrets. Somewhere out there, the creature was still roaming free. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. A movement caught my eye, something large moving between the trees at the edge of our property. My heart raced, adrenaline flooding my system. Was it back? Had it followed me home? I blinked, and the shape was gone. Just a trick of the light, I told myself. Or my overtired mind playing tricks on me. But the fear remained, a constant companion in my waking hours and my restless dreams. As I crawled back into bed, my phone buzzed with a notification. Another comment on one of the many social media posts about my encounter. I didn't need to read it to know what it said. More mockery, more disbelief. I turned off my phone, curling up under the covers. The weight of isolation pressed down on me, heavier than ever. No one believed me. No one understood what I'd been through, what I was still going through. In that moment, I realized that surviving the attack had been only the beginning. The real ordeal was this: living with the knowledge of what was out there, carrying the burden of a truth no one would believe. As I drifted into an uneasy sleep, one thought echoed in my mind. I was alone in my knowledge, alone with my fear, and the creature was still out there, waiting. As the first light of dawn crept through my window, I found myself already awake, my eyes fixed on the ceiling. Sleep had become a luxury I could rarely afford, my nights plagued by vivid nightmares of glowing eyes and reaching claws. The memory of my encounter with Bigfoot had become a constant companion, coloring every moment of my waking life. I dragged myself out of bed, wincing at the lingering pain from my injuries. Though weeks had passed since the attack, my body still bore the scars, a constant physical reminder of what I'd endured. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror and hardly recognized the person staring back at me. Dark circles underlined my eyes, and a haunted look had taken up permanent residence in my gaze. Downstairs, I could hear my parents moving about the kitchen, their hushed voices carrying a note of concern that had become all too familiar. I steeled myself for another day of worried glances and careful conversations. "Morning, honey," my mom said as I entered the kitchen, her smile a little too bright. "How are you feeling today?" I shrugged, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "Same as yesterday. Same as every day." My dad looked up from his newspaper, his forehead creased with worry. "Emma, we've been thinking, maybe it's time to consider talking to someone. A professional." I set my mug down harder than necessary, coffee sloshing over the rim. "We've been over this. I'm not crazy. I don't need a shrink." "No one's saying you're crazy," my mom interjected quickly. "We're just worried about you. You've been through a traumatic experience." "You mean the traumatic experience you don't believe happened?" I snapped. The silence that followed was deafening. My parents exchanged that look I'd grown to hate, a mixture of concern and helplessness. "I'm going for a walk," I muttered, unable to bear their scrutiny any longer. Outside, the morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine from the nearby forest. I found myself drawn to the edge of our property, my eyes scanning the tree line. Somewhere out there, hidden in those woods, was the creature that had turned my life upside down. As I stood there, lost in thought, a voice startled me out of my reverie. "Emma? Is that you?" I turned to see Sarah, my once best friend, jogging along the road. She slowed to a stop, her expression a mixture of surprise and concern. "Hey," I said, my voice flat. "What are you doing here?" Sarah shifted uncomfortably. I've been trying to reach you." You haven't been answering your phone? I shrugged, turning back to the forest. Haven't felt much like talking. She was quiet for a moment, then said softly, Emma, I'm worried about you. We all are. This obsession with what happened in the forest, it's not healthy. I whirled to face her, anger flaring. Obsession? Is that what you call it when someone tries to tell the truth? Emma, please, Sarah pleaded. I know you believe what you saw was real, but what? I interrupted. But it's impossible? But I must be confused or lying or crazy. Sarah flinched at my tone. That's not what I meant. I miss my friend. We all do. Can't you just try to move on? I laughed bitterly. Move on? How am I supposed to move on when I know what's out there? When I close my eyes and see those eyes staring back at me? Sarah reached out, but I stepped back. Emma. Just go, I said, suddenly tired. I can't do this right now. As Sarah jogged away, casting worried glances over her shoulder, I felt the weight of isolation settle over me once more. Even my closest friends couldn't understand what I was going through. I spent the rest of the day in a haze, going through the motions of normal life while my mind constantly drifted back to that night in the forest. As evening fell, I found myself once again drawn to the window, staring out at the darkening woods. A movement caught my eye. Something large, moving between the trees at the edge of our property. My heart raced, adrenaline flooding my system. Was it back? Had it followed me home? I blinked, and the shape was gone. Just a trick of the light, I told myself. Or my overtired mind playing tricks on me. But the fear remained, a constant companion in my waking hours and my restless dreams. Later that night, unable to sleep, I sat at my computer, scrolling through local news sites. A headline caught my eye. Strange noises reported in Tillamook State Forest. My heart pounded as I read the article. Hikers and campers had reported unusual sounds, loud, inhuman vocalizations that couldn't be attributed to any known wildlife. The Forest Service had dismissed the reports as likely coyotes or perhaps a practical joke, but I knew better. It was out there, still roaming the forest, perhaps looking for its next victim. I wanted to warn people, to shout from the rooftops about the danger lurking in the woods. But who would listen? I was already the local crazy, the girl who cried Bigfoot. Any attempt to spread the word would only be met with more ridicule and disbelief. As the first light of dawn began to creep through my window, I made a decision. I couldn't go back to my old life, couldn't pretend this never happened. But I also couldn't keep living in fear, jumping at every shadow and sound. I had to find a way to live with this knowledge, to carry the burden of truth without letting it crush me. It wouldn't be easy. The memory of that night would always be with me, a scar on my psyche as real as those on my body. But I had survived the attack. I could survive this too. I looked out at the forest one last time, the trees now bathed in the soft light of dawn. I know you're out there, I whispered, and I'll never forget. But I won't let you control my life anymore. As I turned away from the window, I felt a small measure of peace settle over me. The creature was still out there, yes. The danger was real. But I was alive, and I was stronger than my fear. I couldn't make the world believe me. I couldn't change what had happened. But I could choose how to live with the memory. And that, I realized, was its own kind of victory.